At my father's funeral, my sister-in-law stood over his casket holding a microphone and declared that my husband gets the media company and the $800 million. The entire church went silent. She smiled that shark-like smile of hers and reached out to touch the mahogany wood. Then, something impossible happened. My dad chuckled. From inside the coffin. It was a dry, raspy laugh that echoed through the speakers. My sister-in-law dropped the microphone and screamed. She did not know that my father was not actually dead. And she definitely did not know that I was not just a broke accountant driving a rusted Honda. I am a forensic accountant for the FBI, and I had spent the last 6 months building a case against her, because my brother is married to a monster and she just signed her own arrest warrant in front of 500 witnesses. Before I tell you how we took down the greediest woman in Atlanta, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to sit back and watch karma destroy someone who underestimated you. The morning of the funeral was humid and heavy, the kind of Atlanta heat that sticks to your skin the moment you step outside. I pulled my 10-year-old silver Honda Civic into the parking lot of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church. The engine sputtered and died with a wheeze that drew stares from the valet parking attendants. I ignored them. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I wore a simple black dress I had bought at a discount store, no makeup, and my hair pulled back in a severe bun. To the world and to my family, I was Simone the failure. The daughter who could not catch a rich husband. The accountant who barely made ends meet. I took a deep breath and touched the hidden camera glasses perched on my nose. Recording started. It was time to go to work. Just as I stepped out of my car, a white stretch limousine the size of a city block pulled up to the curb, blocking the entrance. The driver hopped out and opened the rear door. A pair of red bottom heels hit the pavement, followed by legs that seemed to go on forever. It was Victoria, my sister-in-law. My breath caught in my throat. At a funeral for one of the most respected black businessmen in Georgia, Victoria was wearing a bright crimson-red dress with a slit that went all the way up to her hip. She looked like she was going to a red carpet premiere, not a burial. She adjusted her oversized Gucci sunglasses and snapped her fingers at her personal videographer, who was trailing behind her. "Start the live stream," she commanded, her voice loud enough to carry across the lot. "Make sure you get the church in the background. I need the lighting to be somber but expensive looking." She posed, pouting her lips at the camera phone. I walked toward the steps, hoping to slip past her unnoticed, but luck was not on my side. Victoria spotted me. She physically stepped in front of me, blocking my path to the church doors. Her perfume was overpowering, a mix of expensive vanilla and arrogance. "Stop right there, Simone," she hissed, her smile for the camera instantly vanishing. "You are not walking in the main entrance with me. Look at you. You are driving that piece of junk and wearing a dress that looks like a potato sack. I have 50,000 followers watching this live stream right now. Do not ruin my aesthetic with your poverty." I adjusted my glasses, ensuring the camera lens captured her face perfectly. "This is my father's funeral, Victoria," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I am going inside to say goodbye." Victoria laughed, and it was a cruel sound. "Your father died disappointed in you, Simone. He left everything to Kendrick and me because we represent the future. You represent the mistake. Now go around to the side entrance. The main doors are for the nuclear family and the media." She turned her back on me and waved at her fans through the phone screen. "Hey guys, welcome to the saddest day of my life. I am so heartbroken." I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to flash my badge. I wanted to tell her that the only reason she was not in handcuffs right now was because we needed her to lead us to the money laundering ring she was running. But I held back. Patience is part of the job. I walked toward the side door, my head down, playing the part of the beaten dog. But inside, I was smiling. "Keep talking, Victoria. Every word you say is evidence." I entered the sanctuary through the side door just as the organ music swelled. The church was packed. The elite of Atlanta were here. Senators, business tycoons, and community leaders filled the pews. The air smelled of lilies and old money. I walked down the side aisle scanning the crowd. I saw my brother Kendrick sitting in the front row. He looked small, his shoulders hunched. He was a former NBA star, but sitting there waiting for his wife, he looked like a frightened child. I moved to take my seat in the front row next to him, the place reserved for immediate family. But before I could reach the pew, a large hand clamped down on my shoulder. I turned to see a security guard, a man I did not recognize. He was wearing an earpiece and looked more like a bouncer than a church usher. "Excuse me, ma'am," he rumbled. "This row is reserved for VIPs." I looked at him confused. "I am Simone. Elijah was my father. That is my brother right there." The guard did not move. He tapped his earpiece, listening to instructions. "I am sorry. Ms. Victoria has given strict orders. The front row is for the widow's party and the board of directors. She said extended relatives and staff need to sit in the back." Staff. My blood boiled. She had listed me as staff at my own father's funeral. I looked at Kendrick, hoping he would intervene. He saw me. Our eyes met. For a second, I saw a flicker of shame in his face. But then Victoria swept down the aisle, the camera phone still pointed at her face. She sat down next to Kendrick and placed a manicured hand on his knee, squeezing it hard. Kendrick looked away from me and stared at the floor. He was not going to help me. He was too terrified of losing his trophy wife. "Fine," I whispered to the guard. "I will sit in the back." I turned and walked back up the aisle, feeling hundreds of eyes on me. I could hear the whispers. "That is Elijah's daughter. Why is she sitting with the help? Is it true she was disowned? Look at that cheap dress, she must be broke." I kept my chin up and found a seat in the last row next to the janitorial staff and the caterers. Just as I sat down, the side door opened again, and Mr. Sterling entered. He was my father's attorney and oldest friend, a man who had been a second father to me. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He walked with purpose, ignoring the greeting nods from the senators and businessmen. He scanned the room, and his eyes landed on me in the back row. He frowned. Victoria watched him from the front row, a smug smile on her face. She patted the empty spot next to her, expecting him to join the power circle. But Mr. Sterling walked right past her. He walked past the board of directors. He walked all the way to the back of the church. He stopped in front of my pew, and to the shock of the entire room, he bowed his head to me. "Ms. Simone," he said, his voice loud enough to carry in the sudden silence. "My deepest condolences. May I have the honor of sitting with you?" Victoria turned around in her seat, her mouth hanging open. The live stream camera wobbled in her hand. She did not understand what was happening. She thought she was the queen of this event. She had no idea that the man holding the keys to the $800 million empire just publicly declared his loyalty to the woman she had just thrown in the trash. I moved over and patted the cushion next to me. "Please sit, Mr. Sterling," I said, looking directly at Victoria across the rows of pews. "The view is actually much better from back here. You can see everything that is going on." Sterling sat down and placed the briefcase on his lap. He leaned in close to me and whispered, "The stage is set. Your father would have loved that entrance. Are you ready for the main event?" I adjusted my glasses and focused on Victoria, who was now furiously whispering at my brother. "I am ready," I whispered back. "Let her think she has won. It will make the fall that much harder." I retreated into the small private waiting room adjacent to the main sanctuary, needing a moment to escape the suffocating humidity and the even more suffocating judgment of the crowd outside. The air conditioning hummed with a low vibration that rattled the crystal vases filled with white lilies on the side tables. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands, and checked the battery life on the hidden camera glasses perched on my nose. I was alone for exactly 10 seconds before the heavy oak door banged open and Victoria swept in. She did not look like a grieving daughter-in-law. She looked like a predator scanning the savannah for a wounded animal. The crimson silk of her dress rustled like spilled blood as she stalked across the Persian rug. She spotted me standing near the water cooler trying to blend into the wallpaper. A cruel smile twisted her lips as she walked over to the refreshments table. She poured herself a cup of ice water, the cubes clinking against the crystal glass like warning bells. "Thirsty work, isn't it?" she asked, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Pretending to belong here among the elite must be exhausting for someone like you." I did not answer. I just watched her, keeping my head slightly lowered so the camera lens could capture every micro-expression of disdain on her face. I knew she wanted a reaction. She wanted the angry black woman stereotype she could sell to her followers. I refused to give it to her. Then, with a flick of her wrist that was as casual as checking a text message, she tossed the entire cup of ice water onto the front of my dress. The cold shock made me gasp audibly. The water soaked into the cheap fabric, instantly turning it a darker shade of black and clinging uncomfortably to my skin. Ice cubes slid down my chest and hit the floor with wet thuds. "Oops," she said, not even bothering to feign an accident. My hand slipped, just like your father's heart slipped a beat when he finally realized what a total failure you turned out to be. I stood there, water dripping onto my scuffed shoes, my fists clenched at my sides. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice deadly calm despite the rage boiling in my gut. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, until I could smell the expensive vanilla and gin on her breath. "You heard me, Simone. Elijah died of a broken heart, sweetie. And do you know why? Because he had to look at you every day. A 33-year-old spinster, working a dead-end accounting job, driving a rusted car. He was so ashamed of you. He told me the night before he died. He grabbed my hand and said, 'Victoria, thank God I have you and Kendrick. At least one of my children knows how to live like a winner. At least one of them isn't a genetic dead end.'" She reached out and brushed a piece of imaginary lint off my wet shoulder, her nails digging slightly into my skin. "You should know your place, Simone. You are the stain on this family's legacy. Now go dry off in the janitor's closet like a good little girl. The adults have business to discuss, and we don't need you dampening the mood." I watched her turn and check her reflection in the mirror, smoothing her hair as if she hadn't just assaulted me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that Dad and I laughed about her vanity every Sunday over coffee, but I held it in. I let the water soak my dress, and the insults soak my soul, because every drop was fuel for what was coming. I left the waiting room, my dress damp and cold against my skin, sticking to me in the most humiliating way possible. I needed to find Kendrick. He was the only blood family I had left, and despite his weakness, he was still my big brother. I found him in the hallway near the vestry, standing in a shadow as if trying to hide from the bright lights of the main hall. He was standing in front of a full-length gilded mirror, but he wasn't looking at himself. He was obsessively adjusting his tie, his large hands shaking with a tremor I had never seen before. He looked good in his custom suit, the expensive fabric hiding the softness that had replaced his athlete's muscle since he retired from the NBA, but his eyes were empty. He looked like a man who had forgotten who he was. "Kendrick," I said, stepping up beside him. He flinched violently, as if I had struck him. He looked at me in the mirror, his eyes darting to the wet patch on my dress, then quickly away. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask who did it. He just pulled at his collar as if it were choking him. "What happened to you?" he mumbled, his voice thick with stress. "You look a mess, Simone. Fix yourself before the cameras see you." "Victoria happened," I said, stepping into his line of sight so he had to look at me. "Kendrick, we need to talk. She is out of control. Did you hear what she said to me outside? Did you see how she treated Mr. Sterling? She just threw water on me in the waiting room. She is turning Dad's funeral into a circus for her social media." Kendrick spun around, his face flushing a deep, angry red. But it wasn't anger at his wife. It was annoyance at me. It was the look of a man who just wanted the noise to stop. "Stop it, Simone," he hissed. keeping his voice low. Just stop it. Why do you always have to cause drama? Today of all days, can you not just be invisible for once? I am not the one causing drama, I insisted, grabbing his arm. She just assaulted me, Kendrick. She told me Dad was ashamed of me. She is lying about everything. You have to see that. You have to stand up to her. Kendrick yanked his arm away from me with surprising force. He sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion that rattled in his chest. He reached out not to comfort me, but to straighten a rosette on a flower arrangement next to us, avoiding my gaze. Victoria is under a lot of pressure, he said, reciting the lines she must have fed him 1,000 times. She is grieving in her own way. She wants this to be perfect for Dad. And you need to be more considerate of her condition. Condition, I asked, incredulous. Being a narcissist is not a medical condition, Kendrick. Kendrick turned back to the mirror, smoothing his tie for the 10th time, his expression hardening into a mask of denial. Look, Simone, I cannot deal with your jealousy right now. I know you hate that she is successful and beautiful, but you have to respect her position. Victoria is carrying my son. She is carrying the heir to the E-media empire. The doctor said she needs absolute peace. No stress, no arguments, no jealous sisters-in-law. He turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw the fear behind his eyes. He was terrified of her. So if you cannot be supportive, just stay out of her way. Do not make me choose between my sister and the mother of my child. Because you will lose, Simone. You will lose every single time. Now excuse me, I need to make sure the lighting is right for her speech. He walked away without looking back, heading toward the sound of Victoria's voice commanding the photographers. I watched him go, realizing with a sinking heart that the brother I knew, the one who used to protect me on the playground, was gone. He was dead and buried just like our father. All that was left was a husk of a man owned body and soul by the woman in the red dress. And I was completely on my own. The organ music faded into a somber hum as Pastor Jenkins stepped up to the pulpit. He was a giant of a man with a voice like rolling thunder, a legend in Atlanta who had baptized half the people in this room, including me. He adjusted his reading glasses and opened his Bible, ready to deliver the eulogy for his oldest friend. He cleared his throat and began to speak about my father's kindness and his humble beginnings. But he barely got 10 words out before the click-clack of stilettos echoed on the marble steps of the altar. Victoria did not just walk up the stairs. She ascended them like she was accepting an Academy Award. She breezed past the open casket without even a glance at the man who had welcomed her into his home. She walked straight up to Pastor Jenkins and placed a hand on his microphone. "Thank you, Reverend, but I will take it from here." Her voice boomed through the sanctuary speakers, cutting off the pastor mid-sentence. She smiled at him, a tight, dismissive smile that said, "Move or be moved." The pastor looked at her in disbelief. He looked at Kendrick in the front row, but my brother just stared at his shoes, unable to meet the old man's eyes. With a heavy sigh, Pastor Jenkins stepped back, yielding the floor to the woman in the red dress. Victoria gripped the podium with both hands and leaned into the microphone. She did not look at the congregation with sympathy. She looked at them like a CEO addressing shareholders after a hostile takeover. She did not open with a memory of my father. She did not talk about his charity work or his love for jazz music. "Welcome, everyone," she announced, her voice bright and jarringly cheerful against the funeral atmosphere. "We are gathered here today not just to say goodbye to the past, but to welcome the future." Elijah built a nice little business in his time. He did well for a man of his background. But let us be honest, E-Corp has been stagnant for years. It has been stuck in the old ways of doing things, reliance on community handshake deals, and outdated loyalty. A ripple of murmurs went through the pews. Business partners who had worked with my father for 40 years exchanged dark looks. "But do not worry." Victoria continued, her voice rising with excitement. "That ends today. Under my guidance and with Kendrick by my side, E-Corp is going to undergo a massive rebranding. We are pivoting to high-end luxury developments, We are cutting the dead weight of those low-income housing projects Elijah was so fond of. We are going global. This funeral is not an ending. It is a launch party for the new regime. She gestured to the massive screens flanking the altar, where a tribute video was supposed to play. Instead, the screen flickered and displayed a rendering of a futuristic glass skyscraper stamped with a new logo. The logo did not say E Corp, it said VK Enterprises. I heard a gasp from the row in front of me. She was erasing my father's name at his own funeral. She was using his death to pitch her real estate fantasy to his grieving network. I adjusted my glasses, ensuring the camera caught the projected image and the look of pure greed on her face. She was not grieving. She was networking. Victoria paused for effect, clearly expecting applause. When she was met with stunned silence, she simply tossed her hair and laughed. Oh, do not look so glum. Elijah would have wanted this. He knew that to survive in this world you have to be ruthless. He knew that the company needed a facelift. And let us be honest, he knew it needed someone who actually looks the part of a modern billionaire. She smoothed the front of her red dress, posing for her live stream again. The sheer disrespect was suffocating. She was standing over his dead body, telling his lifelong friends that his legacy was garbage and that she was the savior they had all been waiting for. I looked at Mr. Sterling beside me. His jaw was set so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He started to stand up, but I put a hand on his arm. Wait, I whispered. She is not done. I can feel it. Let her dig the hole a little deeper. Victoria seemed to feed off the tension in the room. She mistook their shock for awe. She unclipped the microphone from the stand and began to pace back and forth in front of the casket, enjoying the spotlight. You know, Elijah and I had a special connection, she lied effortlessly. He told me that he was tired. He was tired of carrying this family. He looked at Simone and saw mediocrity. He looked at Kendrick and saw potential that needed the right partner to unlock it. That is why he left everything to us. He wanted to ensure that his empire was in capable hands. She stopped pacing and stood center stage, placing both hands protectively over her stomach. The room went quiet again, waiting for the next blow. I zoomed in with my camera glasses. I knew what was coming. I had seen the way she looked at us, the way she looked at anyone who did not look like her. And the best part is that this legacy is secure. She said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that boomed through the speakers. Kendrick and I are not just building buildings, we are building a dynasty. As many of you know, I am carrying the heir to this fortune. She rubbed her flat stomach, smiling beatifically. And let us be real for a moment. It is time this family had an upgrade. Elijah was a great man, but he came from nothing. He struggled. He had that survivor mentality that holds people back. But my son will be different. She looked out at the sea of successful black faces in the pews, doctors, lawyers, judges, and senators, people who had fought tooth and nail for their success. My son will have the best of both worlds, she declared. He will have the money, but he will also have the pedigree. Finally, the bloodline of this family is going to be improved. We are breeding out the weakness. We are adding a touch of class and genetic superiority that E Corp has been missing for 50 years. Thanks to my genes, this baby will not have to work twice as hard to get half as much. He will just be entitled to it all. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. It sucked the air out of the room. It was the kind of silence that happens right before an explosion. She had just stood in a historic black church at the funeral of a black icon and told 500 people that her white genes were the cure for their inferiority. Someone in the back row dropped a hymnal, and the sound was like a gunshot. A low, angry rumble started to build in the congregation. People were shifting in their seats, turning to each other with expressions of disbelief and fury. I saw Mrs. Johnson, the head of the church choir, stand up and walk out, her face a mask of disgust. Several business partners followed her. Even Kendrick looked up, his face draining of color as he realized what she had just said. He reached out a hand as if to stop her, but he was too far away and too late. Victoria seemed oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere. Or maybe she just did not care. She thought she was untouchable. She thought her money and her skin protected her from consequences. She smiled out at the angry faces, thinking she had just delivered a motivational speech. I checked my recording. It was perfect. Audio and video crystal clear. She had just alienated every single ally my father ever had. She had insulted the judge who would likely preside over the probate hearing. She had spit in the face of the community that built this city. I leaned over to Mr. Sterling. "Did you get that?" I asked. Every word he replied, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "She just handed us the motive for a hate crime enhancement if we ever need it." I sat back and crossed my arms. The room was buzzing now, the anger palpable. Victoria was still smiling, holding her stomach, basking in her delusion. She had no idea. She thought she had just crowned herself queen. She did not realize she had just lit the match that would burn her entire world to the ground, and all I had to do was watch it burn. Victoria was not done yet. She wanted to make sure everyone knew exactly who signed the checks from now on. She stepped down from the pulpit and walked right up to the casket. She stood there like she was inspecting a piece of furniture she just bought at an auction. She placed her hand on the polished mahogany wood, not with tenderness but with possession. "Elijah made me a promise," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that the microphone still picked up perfectly. "On his deathbed, he looked me in the eye. He did not ask for Simone. He did not even ask for his lawyers. He asked for me. He said, 'Victoria, you are the only one strong enough to carry this burden. You are the only one with the vision to take $800 million and turn it into $8 billion. She turned her gaze to Kendrick, who was still sitting in the front row, looking like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "Tell them, baby," she commanded. "Tell them what your father said." The entire church turned to look at my brother. This was his chance. This was the moment he could stand up and say no. He could say that our father would never hand his life's work over to a woman who just insulted his entire heritage. I willed him to speak. I stared at the back of his neck, hoping to burn some courage into him. But Kendrick did not stand up. He did not even look up. He just nodded his head. It was a weak, pathetic motion, like a bobblehead doll in a car wreck. He said it. Kendrick mumbled, his voice barely audible. He said Victoria should handle everything. A collective groan went through the room. It was the sound of respect dying. My brother had just sold his soul and his father's legacy for a woman who treated him like an accessory. Victoria beamed. She looked like she had just won the Super Bowl. "There you have it," she announced triumphantly. "The king is dead. Long live the queen." She turned back to the casket. She leaned over it, her face inches from the wood, as if she were going to kiss it. "Don't worry, Elijah," she whispered loudly enough for the first 10 rows to hear. "I will take good care of your money. I will spend it in ways you never even dreamed of. Rest in peace, old man. I have got it from here." She patted the lid of the coffin. And then the coffin laughed. It was not a hallucination. It was not a trick of the acoustics. It was a distinct dry chuckle that rasped through the church's sound system. It sounded like gravel grinding together. It sounded exactly like my father when he heard a joke that was so bad it was funny. Heh, heh, heh. The sound froze the blood in my veins. The entire congregation went rigid. The silence that fell over the room was heavy and terrified. Victoria froze. Her hand was still resting on the wood. She looked around wildly, thinking maybe someone in the front row had laughed. But no one was laughing. Everyone was staring at the box. Then the voice came. It was unmistakable. It was deep and gravelly, and it was coming from inside the casket. "Victoria," the voice boomed. "You always did have a terrible sense of timing." Victoria screamed. It was a high-pitched shriek of pure terror. She scrambled backward, her heels slipping on the marble floor. Her arms flailed as she tried to find purchase on the air. She tripped over the hem of her ridiculous red dress and went down hard. She landed on her back, her legs kicking in the air like an overturned beetle. "He is alive," she screeched, scrambling backward on her hands and knees away from the altar. "He is alive. It is a ghost. Help me, Kendrick. He is going to kill me." The church erupted. People were jumping out of their pews. Some were screaming. Some were praying. Security guards were rushing forward, but they did not know who to tackle. I sat perfectly still in the back row. A slow smile spread across my face. I looked at Mr. Sterling. He checked his watch and nodded. "Right on schedule," he murmured. Victoria was hyperventilating on the floor, pointing a shaking finger at the coffin. I heard him. He laughed at me. "He is dead. I saw him die." I checked the pulse myself. "Did you?" Now the voice from the coffin boomed again. "Or did you just check the bank account balance?" The lid of the coffin did not move. But the voice was louder now, filling every corner of the room. It was the voice of judgment. And Victoria was the only one on trial. I stepped out of the cool sanctuary into the blinding Atlanta afternoon, the humidity hitting me like a physical weight. The whispers from the pews followed me out, a buzzing hive of confusion and judgment that I knew would be all over social media within the hour. My father had just publicly humiliated his daughter-in-law from inside a mahogany box, and the city's elite had front-row seats. I adjusted my glasses, ensuring the recording light was off to save battery for the main event, and walked toward my rusted Honda. Mr. Sterling's sleek black sedan was already idling at the curb, but I needed the drive to center myself. I needed the familiar rattle of my own engine to remind me of the role I was playing. Victoria was already gone, her white limousine tearing out of the parking lot with a screech of tires that felt disrespectful in a churchyard. She was running. Running to the mansion, running to the lawyers, running to whatever safety she thought money could buy. She didn't realize she was running straight into a cage my father and I had spent 3 years building. I merged onto the highway, keeping a safe distance behind the line of luxury cars heading toward Buckhead. My mind replayed the voice in the church. "Victoria, I'm watching you." It had been perfect. Dad had recorded hundreds of variations of that speech, predicting every possible move she could make. He knew her better than she knew herself. He knew her greed was predictable, her vanity exploitable. The technology was impressive, but the psychology behind it was the real weapon. As I drove through the wrought iron gates of the Buckhead estate, a wave of nostalgia mixed with nausea washed over me. This was the house I grew up in, a sprawling architectural masterpiece that blended modern lines with southern charm. But now it looked different. Victoria had already started her renovations. The beautiful century-old oak trees that used to line the driveway were gone, replaced by imported Italian cypresses that looked thin and out of place in the Georgia heat. The warm, inviting brick had been painted a stark, clinical white. It didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a museum for people who hated art. I parked my car next to the fountain, ignoring the glare from the valet who clearly thought I was the cleaning lady arriving late. I walked up the front steps, the heavy oak doors already open. Inside the house was chaos. Victoria was standing in the center of the grand foyer, screaming at a terrified maid. "I said champagne," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the marble floors. "Not sparkling wine. Champagne. We are celebrating. I survived the old man's ghost, didn't I? Now pour." Kendrick was sitting on the bottom step of the grand staircase, his head in his hands. He looked like he was trying to make himself invisible. He had loosened his tie, and his suit jacket lay crumpled on the floor next to him. He didn't look up when I entered. Mr. Sterling was already there, standing by the entrance to the library, his briefcase resting on a small antique table. He gave me a subtle nod. The players were assembled. The trap was set. "Well, look who finally dragged herself in," Victoria sneered, spotting me. She swirled a glass of champagne, her composure seemingly regained through the power of alcohol and entitlement. "Did your car break down, Simone? Or did you just stop to cry over your lost inheritance?" "I'm just here for the reading, Victoria," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Mr. Sterling said attendance was mandatory." "Mandatory for beneficiaries," she corrected, taking a long sip. For you, it's just a formality, a chance to say goodbye to the lifestyle you never deserved. She turned to Mr. Sterling, snapping her fingers. Let's get this over with. I have contractors coming at 3 to discuss tearing down this hideous library. I need the funds released by then. Mr. Sterling picked up his briefcase and walked into the library without a word. We followed. The library was my father's sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with first editions, African art, and photos of our family before everything went wrong. It smelled of old paper and tobacco, a scent that instantly brought tears to my eyes. Victoria marched in and sat at the head of the long conference table, the seat my father always occupied. "Sit down, Kendrick," she barked. My brother shuffled in and sat to her right, looking like a man walking to the gallows. I took a seat at the far end opposite Victoria. Mr. Sterling stood in the middle of the room. He didn't sit. He placed a single thick envelope on the table. It was sealed with red wax. "The last will and testament of Elijah Vance," Sterling announced, dated 3 days prior to his departure. 3 days? Victoria narrowed her eyes. He was in a coma for a week before he died. How could he sign anything 3 days before? "Your father had moments of lucidity," Sterling lied smoothly. "And his intent was clear." He broke the seal. The sound was loud in the quiet room. He pulled out a document that was surprisingly thin. "Article 1, Sterling read. "I, Elijah Vance, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils." Victoria smirked. "Standard. Keep going. Get to the numbers." Article 2. Sterling continued, his eyes flicking to me for a split second. "To my son Kendrick, I leave my collection of vintage basketball jerseys and the advice to find his spine before he loses his soul." Kendrick flinched. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Sentimental garbage. Where is the money?" Article 3. Sterling read, his voice dropping an octave. "To my daughter-in-law Victoria, I leave the knowledge that I saw everything, the pills, the altered checks, the late-night phone calls." Victoria froze. Her glass stopped halfway to her mouth. "What is this? This isn't a will. This is a joke." Article 4, Sterling said, ignoring her. "Regarding the estate including E Corp, the real estate portfolio, and liquid assets totaling approximately $800 million. Victoria leaned forward, her greed overriding her fear. "Yes, go on." "These assets," Sterling read slowly, "have been placed into a blind trust named the Humble Trust. The assets are frozen effective immediately." "Frozen?" Victoria stood up, slamming her hand on the table. "What do you mean frozen? I need that money now. I have debts, I have renovations." "The trust has a unique activation clause," Sterling explained calmly. "The assets will remain locked for a period of 6 months. During this time, the beneficiaries will receive a monthly stipend." "A stipend?" Victoria scoffed. "How much? $1 million a month? 500,000? Sterling looked at the paper. $5,000 a month. The silence was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Then Victoria started to laugh. It was a manic, high-pitched sound. $5,000? That doesn't even cover my hair appointment." "You're lying. This is fake. Kendrick, tell him he's lying." Kendrick looked up, his eyes wide. "Vic, 5,000 is... it's not a lot." "It's nothing," she screamed. "It's poverty. I am not living on $5,000 a month." "There is a condition to unlock the full inheritance early," Sterling interrupted, his voice cutting through her tantrum. Victoria stopped screaming. She looked at him, desperate hope in her eyes. "What is it? I'll do it. Whatever it is, I'll sign it." "It's not a signature," Sterling said. "It's a challenge." He pulled a second document from the envelope. "The Humble Trust stipulates that if any beneficiary can prove they have earned $10,000 through manual labor, no consulting, no influencing, no management, bona fide manual labor within the next 30 days, the trust will unlock an emergency fund of $1 million. Victoria stared at him. "Manual labor? Like working? Like cleaning floors?" Sterling clarified. Like serving tables. Like digging ditches. Your father-in-law believed that you had forgotten the value of $1. He wanted to remind you. Victoria looked at her manicured hands. She looked at her expensive dress. Then she looked at Kendrick. Well, she hissed, what are you waiting for? Go get a job. Go dig a ditch. I need that $1 million by Friday. Kendrick blinked. Me? But Vic? My back? My knees? I don't care about your knees, she screamed, throwing her champagne glass against the wall. It shattered, spraying glass over my father's books. Get out there and work, or I swear to God the stress will make me lose this baby. She grabbed her stomach, dramatically wincing in fake pain. Ooh, the baby, the air. You're killing him with this stress. I sat back in my chair watching the performance. It was pathetic. It was predictable. And it was exactly what we needed. She was desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. Desperate people take shortcuts. I pass, I said quietly. Victoria whipped her head around to look at me. What? I pass on the challenge, I said, standing up. I have a job. My accounting salary is $50,000 a year. That's enough for me. I don't need the million. Victoria looked at me with pure loathing. Of course you don't. You have no ambition. You're happy being a peasant. But I am not. I am a queen, and I will get what is mine. She turned to Kendrick. Get up. We are leaving. We are going to find you a job. And Sterling. You better have that check ready, because when we come back with that $10,000, I'm going to fire you first. She stormed out of the library, dragging Kendrick behind her. I watched them go, a small smile playing on my lips. She took the bait. She was going to try to cheat. There was no way Victoria or Kendrick would do manual labor. They would try to fake it. They would try to launder the money. And when they did, I would be waiting. Phase 2 complete, Sterling said, closing the folder. She's panicked. She's going to try to sell the assets, I said. She can't wait 30 days. She has loan sharks calling her. I saw the messages on her phone when she threw it on the table. We have eyes on the art collection, Sterling asked. Camera 3 and 4, I confirmed. If she touches a single painting, we'll have it on tape. Your father would have enjoyed this, Sterling said, a rare smile touching his lips. He is enjoying it, I said, looking up at the hidden camera in the corner of the bookshelf. Aren't you, Dad? Somewhere in a safe house miles away, I knew Elijah Vance was watching the feed, drinking his coffee, and waiting for the moment to spring the trap. The funeral was over. The game had just begun. The white limousine idled in the driveway of the Buckhead estate, looking like a stranded whale in the Georgia heat. I parked my rusted Honda behind it and watched as Victoria practically fell out of the back seat. She didn't wait for the driver to open the door. She kicked it open herself, her red dress bunched up around her thighs. She stormed toward the front steps, her heels clicking aggressively on the pavement. Kendrick trailed behind her, looking like a man marching to the gallows. His shoulders were slumped, and he kept glancing back at me, as if hoping I had a magic wand to fix the mess his wife had just made. I got out of my car and followed them up the walkway. The humidity was suffocating, but the chill coming off Victoria was colder than a morgue. When she reached the massive double oak doors, she stopped dead. She let out a sound that was half scream, half growl. What is this? She shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at the door. I walked up behind them and saw it. Bright orange stickers were plastered across the seam of the doors. They looked like police evidence tape. Bold black letters read, Asset Inventory in Progress. Do not enter. By order of the probate court. Victoria turned on Kendrick. Her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. Did you do this? She hissed. Did you lock me out of my own house? I did not do anything, Kendrick stammered, holding up his hands. I was with you the whole time, Vic. She spun back to the door and started clawing at the tape. Her long nails dug into the wood, scratching the finish my father had imported from Italy. She ripped the orange paper into shreds, throwing the pieces over her shoulder like confetti. Open it, she screamed, pounding her fist against the wood. Open this door right now. I need a drink. I need to get out of this dress. This is my house. Mine. Just then, a black sedan pulled up behind my Honda. Mr. Sterling stepped out carrying his briefcase. He walked up the driveway with the calm demeanor of a man who had seen it all. I would advise against that, Mrs. Vance Sterling said, his voice smooth and cool. Breaking that seal is a violation of a court order. You could be held in contempt. Victoria froze. She turned slowly to face him, her chest heaving. You, she spat. You did this. You and that dead old man are trying to humiliate me. I am simply following instructions, Sterling said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. He walked past her, ignoring her glare, and unlocked the door. He peeled back the remaining shreds of tape with agonizing slowness. After you, he said, gesturing for us to enter. But be warned, the house is under surveillance. Nothing leaves the premises. Not a painting, not a spoon, not a diamond earring. Everything is being catalogued for the trust. Victoria stormed inside, pushing past him so hard he stumbled. I followed, keeping my head down, my camera glasses recording every second of her meltdown. We gathered in the library, the air thick with dust and tension. This room used to be my father's sanctuary. Now it felt like a courtroom. Victoria marched to the head of the long mahogany table and sat down in my father's chair. She crossed her arms and glared at us, daring anyone to challenge her authority. Kendrick sat to her right, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. I took the seat at the far end opposite Victoria. Mr. Sterling stood in the center of the room. He placed a thick blue folder on the table. He did not sit. He adjusted his glasses and looked at each of us in turn. This is the last will and testament of Elijah Vance, he announced. His voice was steady, professional. Just read it, Victoria snapped. She was tapping her foot, a nervous rhythm that echoed in the quiet room. We know the drill. Kendrick and I get everything. Simone gets the car. Let us sign the papers so I can fire the staff. Sterling ignored her. He opened the folder and began to read. Article 1. The entirety of the estate, including the media conglomerate E Corp, the real estate holdings, and all liquid assets totaling approximately $800 million, shall be placed into a blind trust immediately upon my death. Victoria stopped tapping. Her eyes narrowed. A blind trust. What does that mean? It means, Sterling continued, that the assets are frozen. Effective immediately, no beneficiary has direct access to the principal amount. The trust will be managed by an independent executor. Me. Frozen Victoria stood up, slamming her hands on the table. You cannot freeze $800 million. I have bills. I have contractors coming tomorrow to tear down the kitchen. I have a deposit down on a villa in St. Bart's. Sterling raised a hand, silencing her. Sit down, Mrs. Vance. I am not finished. She glared at him, but slowly sank back into the chair. Under the terms of the humble trust, Sterling read, the assets will remain frozen for a period of 6 months. During this probationary period, each beneficiary will receive a monthly living stipend to cover basic necessities. A stipend? Victoria scoffed, rolling her eyes. Fine. How much? 50,000, 100,000. I can make it work if I fire the second chef. Sterling looked up from the paper. His eyes met hers, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of amusement in them. $5,000, he said. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. It sucked the oxygen out of the room. I bit the inside of my lip to keep from smiling. 5,000, Victoria whispered. $5,000 a week. Per month, Sterling corrected. Victoria made a sound like a dying animal. 5,000 a month. That does not even cover my hair appointments. That does not cover the lease on the Porsche. You are joking. This is a joke, right? Elijah is playing another one of his sick pranks. It is no joke, Sterling said, closing the folder. It is a lesson. Your father-in-law believed that you and Kendrick had lost touch with the value of $1. He wanted to remind you what it feels like to live like normal people. Normal people are peasants, Victoria shrieked. I am not a peasant. I am a Vance. I am carrying the heir to this empire. You cannot do this to me. Kendrick looked up, his face pale. Mr. Sterling, he stammered, We have mortgages, we have car payments. $5,000 will not even pay the electricity bill for this mansion. Then I suggest you turn off the lights, Sterling said simply. Or perhaps you should get a job. Job. Victoria spat the word out like it was a curse. I do not work. I am a brand. I am an influencer. Then influence someone to pay your bills, Sterling said. Because until you prove you can survive without the family fortune, you will not see a dime of that 800 million. Victoria looked at me then. Her eyes were wild, desperate. She was looking for an ally. She was looking for someone to scream with her. Did you know about this? She hissed. Did you help him plan this? I adjusted my glasses and looked her dead in the eye. I am an accountant. Victoria, I said calmly. I know how to budget. $5,000 is plenty if you know how to shop at Walmart. She screamed. Then a high-pitched sound of pure frustration. She grabbed a crystal vase from the center of the table and hurled it at the wall. It shattered into a million pieces. I am going to sue you, she screamed at Sterling. I am going to sue the estate. I will burn this house down before I live like a poor person. Good luck with that, Sterling said, checking his watch. But lawyers cost money, Mrs. Vance. And right now, you do not have any. $5,000. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Victoria stared at Mr. Sterling with eyes that looked like they were about to pop out of her skull. She did the math in her head, and the result was catastrophic. Her manicure alone cost $500. Her weekly floral arrangements were $1,000. $5,000 was not a budget. It was an insult. It was a death sentence for her social standing. You have got to be kidding me, she screeched, her voice cracking. That is not even enough to buy one shoe, let alone a pair. Do you expect me to walk around Buckhead hopping on one foot? Do you expect me to wear last season's Prada? This is abuse. This is financial violence. She turned her wild eyes toward me. I was sitting calmly at the end of the table, adjusting my glasses to make sure the camera caught every second of her breakdown. She saw my lack of panic, and it triggered something feral inside her. She did not see a federal agent building a case. She saw a sister-in-law who needed to be punished. You, she hissed, pointing a shaking finger at my face. You did this. You poisoned him against me. You sat by his bedside and whispered lies in his ear while I was out planning his funeral. You told him to lock up the money, didn't you? I did not say a word. I just raised an eyebrow. That was all it took. Victoria lunged. She scrambled over the mahogany table, scattering legal documents and knocking over a pitcher of water. She moved with the speed of a desperate animal. Before Kendrick could even blink, she was on me. Her hands were claws reaching for my face. You witch! She screamed, grabbing a handful of my hair. You jealous little witch! Fix it! Fix it right now or I will tear your eyes out. I did not fight back. I did not need to. I simply turned my head to protect the camera glasses and let her dig her own grave. Her nails scratched my cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. Perfect. Assault on a federal witness. Add it to the list. Kendrick finally woke up from his stupor. He grabbed Victoria by the waist and hauled her off me. She kicked and screamed, flailing like a toddler having a tantrum in a candy store. Get off me, she shrieked at him. Make her fix it, Kendrick. Make her unlock the money. She has the codes. I know she has the codes. I stood up and smoothed my dress. I touched my cheek and looked at the blood on my fingertips. You just committed assault, Victoria, I said, my voice ice cold, in front of a lawyer. That is another violation of the morality clause in the trust. Keep going. You are doing great. Victoria stopped struggling. She looked at Mr. Sterling, who was writing something down in his notebook with a very serious expression. She realized she had gone too far. She smoothed her dress and tried to regain her composure, but her chest was heaving and her eyes were still manic. I am pregnant, she gasped, playing her favorite card. The hormones. I am emotional. You cannot hold a grieving mother responsible for her grief. Mr. Sterling did not look up from his notes. He just turned the page. The sound was deafening in the silent library. "Sit down," Mrs. Vance Sterling said. "We are not done. There is a subclause." Victoria perks up instantly. "A subclause? What is it? Is it the real money?" Sterling pulled a second, thinner document from his briefcase. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Victoria over the rim. "Your father-in-law anticipated that the monthly stipend might be a source of distress," he said. "He provided a way to unlock an emergency fund." Victoria leaned forward, her greed instantly overriding her rage. "How much?" $1 million, Sterling said. Victoria let out a breath she had been holding. Okay, a million is not 800 million, but it is a start. I can work with $1 million. What do I have to do? Sign a paper. Visit his grave. Name the baby Elijah. I will do it. Just give me the check." "It is not a signature," Sterling said. "It is a challenge." He slid the document across the table. Victoria snatched it up and read it. Her face went pale. Then it went red. Then it went a color I had never seen before. "Manual labor," she whispered. "Correct," Sterling said. "The clause states that if any beneficiary can prove they earned $10,000 through bona fide manual labor within 7 days, the trust will release the $1 million emergency fund." Manual labor. Victoria repeated the words, tasting like poison in her mouth. "Like digging ditches. Or cleaning houses," Sterling suggested. "Or landscaping. Or waiting tables. Any job that requires physical effort and does not involve a desk or a phone." $10,000. In 1 week. Victoria looked at her hands. They were soft and manicured. She had never lifted anything heavier than a credit card in her life. She looked at the document as if it were radioactive. "I cannot do manual labor," she said, her voice trembling. "I am pregnant. My doctor said I need bed rest. I cannot stress the baby." "Then I suppose you will have to live on $5,000 a month," Sterling said, reaching to take the document back. "No," Victoria snatched it away. She looked around the room, her eyes darting frantically. They landed on Kendrick. He was sitting with his head in his hands, probably wishing he was back on the basketball court where the rules were simple. Victoria stared at him and a light bulb went on behind her eyes. It was not a warm light. It was the cold, fluorescent light of exploitation. "Beneficiary," she said slowly. "The will says beneficiary. That includes Kendrick, right?" Sterling nodded. "Yes. Mr. Vance is a beneficiary." Victoria slammed the paper down in front of my brother. "Kendrick, wake up." Kendrick jumped, looking at her with wide, fearful eyes. "What? What is it, Vic?" "You heard the man," Victoria said, her voice hard and commanding. "We need $10,000, and I cannot work because I am carrying your son. So guess what? You are going back to work." "Me," Kendrick stammered. "But Vic, my knees. My back. I haven't done physical training in 5 years." "You used to be an athlete," Victoria snapped. "You are strong. You can lift things. Go find a construction site. Go find a moving company. I do not care what you do, but you better bring me $10,000 by next Friday." "But 10,000 in a week," Kendrick said, doing the math. "That is impossible for manual labor. I would have to work 20 hours a day. Then drink some coffee." Victoria said, standing up. "Figure it out, Kendrick. This is your father's mess. You clean it up." She grabbed her purse and checked her reflection in the window. "I am going to the spa," she announced. "This stress is terrible for my complexion. I need a facial and a massage before I have a stroke." "You are going to the spa?" Kendrick asked, his voice weak. "We just lost all our money and you are going to the spa." "I am going to decompress," Victoria corrected him. "I need to be relaxed to support you while you work. It is called partnership, Kendrick. Look it up." She turned to Sterling. "We will have the money. Have that check ready." She marched out of the library, her heels clicking a rhythm of entitlement and delusion. She walked right past me without a glance. She did not see the camera recording her exit. She did not see the look of absolute defeat on her husband's face, and she definitely did not see the trap closing around her ankles. She thought she had found a loophole. She did not realize she had just sent her husband on a mission impossible while she went to get a facial. It was the perfect setup. Kendrick would fail, or he would cheat. And Victoria would be right there pulling the strings, handing us all the evidence we needed to bury her. Victoria waited until Kendrick left for his first day of manual labor at a construction site. The moment his truck disappeared down the driveway, she was on the phone. She was not calling a job recruiter. She was calling Jax, her personal trainer and secret lover. "I need you here now," she whispered into the phone, pacing in front of the fireplace. "Bring the package we talked about. And bring the van. We are doing a little redecorating." She hung up and looked up at the painting hanging above the mantel. It was a Jean-Michel Basquiat, an original piece my father had bought in the 80s before the artist became a global icon. To Victoria, it was just a messy drawing of a skull with a crown. "Ugly trash," she muttered, sipping her morning mimosa. Elijah had terrible taste. Who pays millions for something my nephew could draw with crayons? She did not see the cultural significance. She did not see the history. She just saw a check with a lot of zeros. She had done her research. She knew a private collector in Miami who asked no questions and paid in cryptocurrency. $5,000 a month was a starvation wage for a woman with her lifestyle. But $2 million in cold, hard Bitcoin. That was freedom. Jax arrived 20 minutes later. He looked exactly like the kind of mistake a bored trophy wife would make. Too much muscle, not enough brain, and a tight t-shirt that advertised a gym that probably did not exist. He carried a long, flat cardboard tube under his arm. "Did you get it?" Victoria asked, pulling him inside and locking the door. "Yeah, babe," Jack said, his voice a low rumble. "High-resolution print on canvas, just like you asked. Cost me $200 at the copy shop. $200 to replace a $2 million masterpiece." Victoria laughed. It was a sound of pure larceny. "Perfect," she said. "Help me get this monstrosity down. We need to swap them out before the old bat Sterling sends his inspectors back. No one will notice. It is just scribbles on canvas anyway. These people do not know art. They just know hype." They moved toward the fireplace. Victoria's hands were shaking not with fear, but with adrenaline. She was robbing her own unborn child's inheritance, and she felt absolutely entitled to it. I was sitting in the high-backed wing chair in the corner of the library, partially obscured by a potted palm. I had my laptop open, pretending to balance a spreadsheet, but my eyes were fixed on the scene unfolding before me. More importantly, the camera lens in the bridge of my glasses was fixed on them too. The tiny red recording light was invisible to the naked eye, but to me it felt like a beacon of justice. I watched as Jax grabbed the frame of the Basquiat with his sweaty hands. He did not wear gloves. He did not use proper handling techniques. He just yanked it off the hook like he was taking down a beer sign in a frat house. My heart hammered against my ribs. That painting was a piece of history. It was one of the first things my father ever bought when he made his fortune. It symbolized his rise from the streets to the boardroom. And now it was being manhandled by a gym rat named Jax. I wanted to scream. I wanted to jump up and flash my badge and tackle them both to the ground. Every instinct in my body screamed to protect my father's legacy. But I forced myself to stay frozen. I bit my tongue until I tasted copper. If I stopped them now, it was just attempted theft. It was a misunderstanding. Victoria could claim she was just cleaning it or moving it to a safer room. She could spin her way out of it. But if I let them take it out the door, if I let them put it in that van and drive away, that was grand larceny. That was theft of estate assets. That was a federal crime involving interstate commerce if they sold it to that buyer in Miami. I needed the transaction to be complete. I needed the chain of custody to be broken. Jack set the real painting down on the floor, leaning it against the couch. He pulled the fake print out of the tube. It was a decent copy from a distance, but up close the colors were flat, and the texture was all wrong. It looked like a poster you would buy in a college bookstore. Victoria clapped her hands in delight. "It looks exactly the same," she squealed. "God, I am a genius. Put the fake up, Jax. Then wrap the real one in that blanket. Be careful with it. Not because it is art, but because it is my ticket to St. Bart's. I adjusted my glasses, zooming in on the swap. I recorded Jax hanging the $200 fake on the hook where a legend used to hang. I recorded Victoria wrapping the masterpiece in a dirty moving blanket. She turned and scanned the room, her eyes passing right over me. She saw me sitting there, a boring accountant in a gray cardigan, and she dismissed me instantly. She did not think I was a threat. She did not think I even knew what a Basquiat was. To her, I was just furniture. She did not know the furniture was wearing a wire. "Let us go," she whispered to Jax. "Out the back door. The security cameras on the patio are looped. I paid the guard off this morning with my engagement ring." She thought she had covered every angle. She thought she was the smartest person in the room. She grabbed the wrapped painting and headed for the French doors. I waited until the door clicked shut behind them. Then I calmly closed my laptop. "Gotcha," I whispered. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to the surveillance team parked down the street. "The package is on the move. Do not intercept. Let them sell it. I want to catch them counting the money." Victoria strutted back into the library, her designer purse bulging with stacks of cash. She tossed the bag onto the mahogany table with a heavy thud and kicked off her heels. She hummed a cheerful tune, completely unaware that I was standing in the shadows of the bookshelves, watching her celebrate her crime. "That was a mistake, Victoria," I said, stepping into the light. She jumped, clutching her chest as if she had a heart to protect. "God, Simone, you creep. Why are you always lurking in the corners like a cockroach?" I walked over to the fireplace and looked up at the cheap print hanging where the masterpiece used to be. It was crooked. The colors were too bright. It was an insult to the artist and to my father. "You sold a Jean-Michel Basquiat for $50,000. I said, my voice flat and unimpressed. "I saw the text message notification on your phone when you threw it on the table. 50,000. Do you have any idea what you just did?" Victoria laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound that grated on my nerves. "Of course I know what I did. I turned trash into treasure." That ugly skull thing was depressing. It ruined the vibe of the room. And $50,000 pays for my obstetrician and a new wardrobe for the maternity shoot. It is called liquidity, Simone. Look it up. "It is called theft," I corrected her. "And stupidity. That painting was appraised at $2 million last year. You just sold a winning lottery ticket for the price of a used Honda." Victoria stopped laughing. Her eyes flicked to the fake painting, then back to me. For a second I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. But then her ego crashed back in like a tidal wave, drowning out any common sense. "You are lying," she spat. "You are just trying to make me feel bad because you are jealous of my business acumen." $2 million. Please. Elijah bought that from some junkie on the street in the 80s. It is worthless. And even if it was worth millions, who cares? I cannot wait for an auction. I cannot wait for estate sales. I need cash now. She grabbed her purse, hugging it to her chest as if I were going to snatch it away. "Real rich people do not wait, Simone. We take what we want when we want it. That is the difference between you and me. You hoard value. I spend it. Now get out of my sight before I buy this whole house just to evict you." She turned and marched out of the room, leaving me with the fake painting and the real evidence. She had admitted to the sale. She had admitted to the price. She had just confessed to a federal crime to the one person who could prosecute her for it. I looked at the hidden camera lens in the bookshelf and gave a small nod. One felony down. A dozen more to go. Later that night, the side door to the kitchen creaked open. I was sitting at the island drinking tea and reviewing the surveillance logs on my tablet. Kendrick stumbled in. He looked like a man who had been through a war. His expensive Italian suit was ruined, covered in white drywall dust and gray plaster. He walked with a severe limp, his hand pressed against his lower back, his face a mask of pain. "Kendrick," I said softly, setting my tea down. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. He did not look like a former NBA star. He looked broken. He looked like the little boy who used to hide behind me when Dad raised his voice. "Simone," he rasped, his voice cracking. "I need a favor. Just a small one. Do not tell Victoria, please." He limped closer to the island, his voice dropping to a shameful whisper. "My back is killing me. The old injury from the playoffs. It is flaring up bad. I cannot go back to that construction site tomorrow without something for the pain. But my cards are declined. The pharmacy wants a copay. Can you lend me $50? Just 50, Simone. I will pay you back as soon as the trust opens. I swear." My heart broke for him. This was my big brother, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders so I could see the parade. Now he was begging his little sister for pill money because his wife had sent him to do manual labor he was physically unfit for. I reached for my purse. I did not want to enable him, but I could not watch him suffer. I pulled out a $50 bill. Before I could hand him the cash, the kitchen lights blazed on, blinding us both. Victoria stood in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, her face a mask of fury. She crossed the room in 3 long strides. She did not ask what was happening. She did not ask how his first day of work went. She reared back and slapped him across the face. The sound was like a pistol shot in the quiet kitchen. Kendrick stumbled back, clutching his cheek, his eyes wide with shock and humiliation. "You pathetic worm," Victoria screamed. You dare beg from her." "Vic, I just needed medicine," Kendrick stammered, cowering away from her like a beaten dog. "My back. It hurts, Vic." "I do not care about your back," she yelled, getting right in his face. "You are a Vance. You do not beg from the help. You do not lower yourself to ask this failure for money. If you are in pain, suck it up. If you need money, earn it. Do not let me catch you taking handouts from the enemy again." She turned to me, her eyes blazing with hate. "Put your money away, Simone. We do not want your charity. We are going to own you in a month. And you, Kendrick, get upstairs. If you are well enough to beg, you are well enough to give me a foot rub. Move." Kendrick looked at me one last time, a look of pure shame. Then he hung his head and followed her out of the kitchen. He was a man in prison, and he had just let the warden lock the cell door. I put the $50 back in my purse. Saving him was going to take more than cash. It was going to take a demolition crew. And lucky for him, I knew exactly where to place the explosives. The next morning, I found Kendrick in the kitchen staring into a mug of black coffee as if it held the answers to the universe. He was leaning heavily against the granite counter, taking weight off his injured back. He looked 10 years older than 36. The swagger of the star athlete was gone, replaced by the stoop of a man carrying a burden too heavy for his spine. I walked over and poured myself a cup, standing close enough to lower my voice so the household staff would not hear. "Kendrick, we need to talk about the baby," I said softly. His head snapped up, and for a moment, a flicker of defensive anger crossed his face. "Do not start, Simone. I know you hate Victoria, but leave my son out of it. That baby is the only thing keeping me going. It is the future of this family." I took a sip of coffee, watching him over the rim of my cup. "I do not hate the baby, Kendrick. I am worried about the baby. And I am worried about you. I saw Victoria's car yesterday." Kendrick rolled his eyes. "Yeah, she went to the doctor. She had a prenatal checkup. She sent me a picture of the ultrasound. It is a boy, Simone, a healthy boy." "Healthy?" I set my cup down with a deliberate clink. "Kendrick, I saw her car parked at Bellezza Aesthetics in Buckhead." He frowned, confusion clouding his eyes. "So what? Maybe they have an OB/GYN there." "Bellezza is a plastic surgery clinic, Kendrick," I said, keeping my voice steady and factual. "They do Botox. They do fillers. They do liposuction. They do not do prenatal care. In fact, they have a strict policy against treating pregnant women because of the liability. I know because I audited them 2 years ago." Kendrick shook his head, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "You are mistaken. You saw a different white Range Rover. Every woman in Atlanta drives one." I pulled out my phone and slid it across the counter. The photo on the screen was crystal clear. It showed Victoria walking out of Beleza. She was not holding her stomach protectively. She was lighting a cigarette. Kendrick stared at the photo. His face went gray. "She is smoking," he whispered. "She told me she quit. She said the smoke hurts the baby." "Maybe there is no baby to hurt," I said, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "Think about it, Kendrick. Have you been to a single doctor appointment? Have you felt the baby kick? Or does she always have an excuse? Does she always go alone because she says you make her nervous?" Kendrick pushed the phone away as if it burned him. "Stop it. You are lying. You are trying to get inside my head. She is pregnant. I have seen the belly. You have seen a bump under a dress," I countered. "Have you seen it without the Spanx? Have you touched it?" Kendrick slammed his hand on the counter, making the coffee cups jump. "Shut up, Simone. Just shut up. You are jealous because no one wants to have a baby with you. Victoria loves me. She is giving me a son." He stormed out of the kitchen, limping heavily but moving as fast as his pain would allow. He was running away from the truth. But I saw the doubt in his eyes. It was a small crack in the dam, but it was enough. The seed was planted. Now I just had to wait for it to grow. 2 hours later, the front door burst open with a force that shook the house. I was in my room reviewing the case files when I heard heavy boots thundering up the stairs. Before I could even stand up, my bedroom door flew open. 2 uniformed police officers stood there, hands resting on their holsters. Behind them stood Victoria, looking like the grieving victim in a soap opera. She was clutching a handkerchief to her chest and pointing a trembling finger at me. "That is her," she wailed. "That is the thief. She stole them. She stole my mother-in-law's emeralds." I stood up slowly, raising my hands to show I was unarmed. "What is going on here?" Officer Miller, a man with a thick neck and eyes that looked like they had seen too many bribes, stepped forward. "We received a call about a grand larceny in progress. Mrs. Vance claims you stole a vintage emerald necklace and earring set valued at $100,000 from the master suite." I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "This is ridiculous. I have not been in the master suite since I was 10 years old. Victoria is lying. She is trying to distract you from the real theft happening in this house. Check her room." Victoria screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "She hid them. I know she did. She has been jealous of those emeralds since the funeral. She said they should belong to a blood relative, not a white woman." Officer Miller did not ask for permission. He did not show a warrant. He just started tearing my room apart. He pulled the drawers out of my dresser, dumping my clothes onto the floor. He swept the books off my shelves. He flipped my mattress over with a grunt of exertion. "This is an illegal search," I stated, my voice calm but authoritative. "You do not have probable cause, and you do not have a warrant. I am a federal employee, and you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights." Officer Miller sneered at me. "In Buckhead, Mrs. Vance's word is probable cause enough for me, sweetheart. Now sit down and shut up before I charge you with resisting." Victoria stood in the doorway, a smirk playing on her lips as she watched her hired goon trash my sanctuary. She thought she was winning. She thought this would scare me off or get me thrown in jail so she could finish selling off the estate. She needed a scapegoat for the missing art, and I was the perfect target. Officer Miller grabbed my locked briefcase from the closet floor. "Open it," he commanded. "That contains sensitive government files," I said. "You cannot open that." "Watch me," he said. He pulled a baton from his belt and smashed the lock. The briefcase popped open. Victoria leaned forward, her eyes gleaming, expecting to see the glitter of green gems. Instead, Officer Miller pulled out a simple wooden box. He opened it roughly. Inside there were no emeralds. There was only a gold badge and a certificate of commendation from the Department of the Treasury. "What is this?" Miller asked, holding up the badge. It looked heavy and official in his meaty hand. "It is my employee ID," I said, stepping forward and snatching it back. "And you just broke federal property, officer. I hope your pension is worth it, because I am going to have your badge for this." Victoria's face fell. She looked from the empty briefcase to the empty jewelry box Miller had just tossed aside. There was nothing. I had moved the surveillance drives to a secure location hours ago. I knew she would come for me. She moved them, Victoria shrieked. She knew you were coming. Check her car, check her pockets, strip search her if you have to. Officer Miller looked at me, then back at the crazy woman screaming in the hallway. Even he knew when a situation was going sideways. He saw the badge. He saw the cold confidence in my eyes. He realized he was not dealing with a frightened maid. "We are done here," Mrs. Vance Miller said, holstering his baton. "There is no evidence. If you want to file a report, go to the station. But I am not strip-searching a federal accountant without a warrant." He marched out of the room, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. Victoria stood there, fuming, her plan crumbling around her feet. "This is not over, Simone," she hissed. "I will find something on you. Everyone has secrets." I smiled, adjusting my glasses. "You are right, Victoria. Everyone has secrets. But mine are not going to send me to prison for 20 years. Yours are. Now get out of my room." Officer Miller shoved my clothes aside and reached into the back of my closet. He pulled out a small, heavy wooden box made of polished cherry wood. It was locked. Victoria gasped and clapped her hands together like a child at a birthday party. "That is it!" she squealed, pointing a manicured finger. That is where she hid the emeralds. "Open it, officer. Open it right now and arrest this thief." Miller shook the box. Something rattled inside, but it did not sound like loose jewelry. It sounded heavy and solid. He pulled a small pry bar from his utility belt and jammed it under the lid. Wood splintered with a sickening crunch. I did not protest. I just crossed my arms and waited. With a final grunt of effort, Miller popped the lid open. Victoria leaned over his shoulder, her eyes wide with greed, expecting to see the green glint of the Vance family emeralds. Instead, she stared at a piece of metal. It was not gold bullion. It was not a diamond tiara. It was a plaque. A very specific plaque with a heavy bronze medallion mounted in the center. Below the medallion was an engraving, "Department of the Treasury, Award for Meritorious Service, presented to Simone Vance for exceptional dedication to financial crimes enforcement." Victoria picked up the plaque, holding it by the corner as if it were contaminated. She squinted at the text, reading it out loud with a look of pure confusion on her face. "Financial crimes enforcement," she read. Then she looked at me and burst out laughing. It was a loud, cackling sound that bounced off the walls of my ransacked room. "Oh my God," she wheezed, wiping a tear from her eye. "This is it. This is your big secret. You got an Employee of the Month award from the IRS. That is hilarious. I thought you were hiding money, but you are just hiding your own mediocrity." She tossed the plaque onto the bed like it was garbage. "You are such a loser, Simone," she sneered. "You probably framed this and hid it because you were afraid we would make fun of your little government job." And you were right. It is pathetic. You are just a glorified paper pusher with a shiny sticker. I picked up the plaque and dusted off the wood chips. She did not know what that award meant. She did not know it was given to me after I took down a cartel money laundering operation in Miami. She just saw the word service and assumed I was a servant. "You are right, Victoria," I said, my voice calm. "It is just a job. Someone has to balance the books while people like you spend the money." Officer Miller looked at the plaque and then at me. He seemed less amused than Victoria. He recognized the seal. He knew that people who got awards like that usually had friends with badges bigger than his. He cleared his throat and holstered his pry bar. "There is nothing illegal here, Mrs. Vance," he said, backing toward the door. "No emeralds, just personal property. We are leaving." Victoria huffed and followed him out, stepping over my clothes without a second glance. She thought she had won because she found nothing. She did not realize that by dismissing that plaque she had just underestimated the most dangerous person in the room. She thought I was a clerk. She was about to find out I was the auditor from hell. 3 days later, the surveillance system in the study picked up a meeting that made my blood run cold. It was midnight. The house was quiet. Victoria sat at the mahogany desk, the only light coming from a green banker lamp. Across from her sat a man who looked like he chewed gravel for breakfast. He wore a suit that cost more than my car, but fit him like a straitjacket. His name was Silas, and he was not a banker. He was a loan shark who ran the underground gambling rings in Atlanta. I sat in my room, headphones on, listening to the audio feed. "I need 500,000, Victoria said, her voice shaking slightly. "Cash. Tonight." Silas leaned back in my father's chair, putting his feet up on the desk. "That is a lot of money, Mrs. Vance. And from what I hear, your assets are frozen colder than a penguin's backside. How do you intend to pay me back?" "The trust opens in 30 days, Victoria lied smoothly. "I have $800 million coming to me. This is just a bridge loan. I will pay you back double. $1 million in 30 days. Silas laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "I do not care about promises. I care about collateral." "What do you have that is worth $500,000 right now?" Victoria did not hesitate. She pulled a deed from her purse. It was the deed to the Buckhead mansion. My father's house. The house she did not own. The house that belonged to the trust. "This house," she said, slamming the paper down. "It is worth $10 million. If I do not pay you back, you take the house. It is prime real estate. You can turn it into a casino for all I care." Silas picked up the deed and examined it. "It lists Kendrick Vance as the heir," he noted. "Not you." Victoria pulled another paper from her bag. It was a power of attorney document. I zoomed in with the camera. I watched as she picked up a pen. I watched her hand hover over the signature line. "Kendrick trusts me with everything," she said. "He signed this morning." She put the pen to paper. She did not sign her name. She signed Kendrick Vance. She forged my brother's signature on a loan document with a known criminal putting our family home up as collateral for a loan she could never repay. I recorded every stroke of the pen. I recorded the moment she handed the fraudulent document to the loan shark. I recorded Silas handing her a duffel bag filled with stacks of $100 bills. "Done," Silas said, standing up and picking up the deed. "You have 30 days, Victoria. On day 31, I do not come for the money. I come for the keys. And if the keys do not work, I come for your knees. Do we understand each other?" Victoria nodded, clutching the bag of money to her chest. "Perfectly." She waited until he left, then she opened the bag and buried her face in the cash, inhaling the scent of money and crime. She thought she had solved her problem. She thought she had bought herself another month of luxury. She did not know that she had just committed bank fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. She did not know that by signing that paper she had just handed me the final nail for her coffin. She had sold a house she did not own to a man who would kill her for it. And I had it all on tape. I took off my headphones and saved the file. The file name was simple. The End. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Mr. Sterling. She signed, "We have her. Prepare the eviction notice." Then I went to sleep. For the first time in months, I slept like a baby. Because I knew that when Victoria woke up, she would not be waking up in a mansion. She would be waking up in a crime scene, and I would be the one holding the yellow tape. I sat at my desk in the office sipping lukewarm coffee and watching my sister-in-law destroy her own life in high definition on my phone screen. Victoria was live on social media, and she had set the stage with the precision of a Broadway director. She was sitting in the garden of my father's estate, wearing an oversized sweater that was meant to make her look small and vulnerable. She had clearly spent an hour applying makeup to make it look like she was not wearing any makeup. A single perfect tear tracked through the strategically placed bronzer on her cheek. "Hey guys," she whispered into the camera, her voice trembling with a fragility that would have won her an award if the judges were as gullible as her followers. "I did not want to do this. I really did not. I wanted to protect the family name. But I cannot stand by and watch my husband suffer anymore." She held up a grainy photograph to the camera lens. It was a picture taken from a long distance showing me at a park bench handing a thick manila envelope to a man in a leather jacket. Victoria tapped the screen with a manicured nail that cost more than my first car. "This is Simone," she said, her voice hardening with righteous indignation. "This is my sister-in-law handing over cash to her secret boyfriend. Cash that she embezzled from E-Corp. She is stealing from us guys. She is taking money that should go to my unborn child and using it to fund this loser's lifestyle." I laughed out loud in the quiet office. The loser in the leather jacket was Special Agent Rodriguez, my partner at the bureau for the last 5 years. And that envelope did not contain cash. It contained subpoenaed bank records for a cartel money laundering operation we were dismantling. But Victoria did not know that. Her 50,000 live viewers did not know that. They just saw a scandal, and they were hungry for blood. The comments section scrolled by so fast it was a blur of angry emojis and demands for justice. "Lock her up," someone wrote. "Drag her." Victoria, another commented. Victoria saw the engagement numbers climbing and her sorrow evaporated, replaced by the hungry gleam of a predator. "You guys are right," she said, leaning closer to the phone. "Why should I sit here crying while she is out there living it up on my dime? I know where she works. She has this sad little office downtown. Maybe we should go there. Maybe we should go down there right now and ask her where the money is. Who is with me? Who wants to help me get justice for my family?" The chat exploded. I watched as she stood up, a shark smelling blood in the water. "I am going to get the keys," she announced. "Meet me at the Federal Plaza in 20 minutes. Let us go pay Simone a visit." 2 hours later, the view from my 7th-floor window looked like a scene from a bad action movie directed by a teenager. A convoy of brightly colored supercars was snaking its way through the gridlocked traffic of downtown Atlanta. There was a lime green Lamborghini, a matte black G-Wagon that looked like a military vehicle designed by Gucci, and Victoria's white Range Rover, leading the pack like the flagship of an armada of idiots. They were honking their horns and revving their engines, treating the busy city streets like their personal playground. They cut off buses and ignored traffic signals, convinced that their price tags gave them the right of way. I watched as they pulled up to the curb directly in front of the building. They double-parked, blocking a mail truck and a wheelchair access ramp. Victoria hopped out of her car, phone already raised on a selfie stick, recording her march to destiny. She was followed by her entourage, a group of influencers and social climbers, who looked like they had raided a costume shop for the rich and tasteless. They were laughing and high-fiving each other, vaping on the sidewalk, and taking photos of themselves posing against the granite columns. Victoria pointed up at the building, her face twisted in a sneer. "Look at this dump!" she shouted over the noise of the city. "This is where the rat hides. It looks like a prison. She thinks she is safe in her little cubicle counting my money, but we are going to drag her out into the light." She did not read the bronze plaque next to the heavy revolving doors. She did not notice the federal seal etched into the stone above the entrance. She did not see the armed Department of Homeland Security guards standing behind the tinted glass, observing her assembly with hands resting on their holsters. She just saw a gray building and assumed it was as weak and ordinary as she thought I was. She turned to her friends, pumping her fist in the air like a revolutionary leader who shopped at Saks Fifth Avenue. "Let us go get our money back," she screamed. "Squad assemble!" It was the most pathetic battle cry I had ever heard. I turned away from the window and looked at my boss, Director Holloway. He was polishing his glasses, a look of weary amusement on his face. "It looks like you have visitors, Agent Vance," he said. "Should we roll out the red carpet?" I smiled and picked up my radio. "No, sir," I said. "Roll out the tactical team. Let them get through the first set of doors. I want them to feel like they are winning right before the walls close in." Victoria stood on the sidewalk, craning her neck to look up at the looming gray facade of the building. To anyone with a brain, the structure screamed federal authority. It was a monolith of concrete and reinforced glass designed to withstand a bomb blast and intimidate anyone who walked through its doors. But Victoria did not see authority. She saw a lack of aesthetic. She saw a building that had not been power washed in a month. She saw a place that did not have a doorman in a top hat or a valet stand. In her warped reality, this could only mean one thing: poverty. She turned to her phone camera, her face contorted in a mask of exaggerated pity. "Oh my God, you guys," she said, her voice hushed as if she were entering a funeral home. "Look at this place. It is so depressing. It smells like old government cheese and despair. I cannot believe my husband's sister actually works here." She pointed the camera at the small brass plaque near the entrance that read Federal Office Building. She did not read the words. She just saw a small sign and assumed it was irrelevant. "I bet she is in the basement," Victoria continued, giggling with her friends. "She is probably scrubbing the floors or filing taxes for people who cannot afford TurboTax. It makes sense, right? Rats like to live underground. She is hiding down there in the dark, terrified that I am coming to get what belongs to me." Her friend, a guy named Chad who was wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky, laughed. "It looks like the DMV had a baby with a prison," he sneered. "Exactly," Victoria agreed. "It is where dreams go to die. But do not worry, guys. We are going to bring some light into this dungeon. We are going to find Simone, and we are going to make her answer for her crimes." I watched from the 7th floor monitor, shaking my head. She really thought this was just a low-rent office park. She did not know that 3 floors below me, the Department of Homeland Security was running a counterterrorism operation. She did not know that the basement she was mocking housed the evidence locker for the entire southeast region, containing enough seized narcotics and cash to buy her precious Buckhead mansion 10 times over. She thought she was walking into a trap house. She was walking into the lion's den wearing a steak necklace. "Okay, squad, let us do this," Victoria shouted. She adjusted her dress, checked her reflection in the glass door, and pushed. The revolving doors were heavy, bullet-resistant glass. Victoria had to put her shoulder into it to get them moving. She stumbled into the main lobby, her heels clicking loudly on the polished terrazzo floor. The lobby was vast and echoing with high ceilings that made even her ego look small. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that commands respect. There were no potted palms. There was no elevator music. There was just the hum of air conditioning and the silent, watchful gaze of a dozen security cameras. Victoria did not sense the danger. She pulled out her phone and started live streaming again, panning the camera around the room to show her followers the bleak interior. "Hey everyone, we are inside," she whispered loudly. "Look at this place. It is so drab. No wonder Simone is so bitter. If I had to come here every day, I would probably steal money too." She walked toward the center of the lobby, her entourage fanning out behind her like a flock of confused peacocks. She stopped in front of the massive security desk, which was manned by 2 officers in dark blue uniforms. They were not smiling. They were not customer service representatives. They were federal officers, and they were looking at Victoria like she was a security breach waiting to happen. Victoria ignored their stony expressions. She turned her back to them and held her phone up high, framing herself against the backdrop of the metal detectors and X-ray machines. "Everyone, look," she announced to her digital audience. "This is where the rat hides. My sister-in-law thinks she can just disappear into this government hole and we will forget about the millions she embezzled. But we are here. We are live. And we are not leaving until she comes down here and faces me." She spun around and pointed a finger at the ceiling, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Simone Vance. I know you are in here. Come out wherever you are. Stop hiding in the basement like a coward. Come down here and tell my 50,000 followers why you stole my baby's future." Her voice echoed off the hard surfaces, bouncing back at her with a harsh metallic ring. The officers at the desk stood up slowly, their hands resting near their belts. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from quiet to charged. But Victoria was too busy reading the comments on her screen to notice that the lockdown lights had just started to blink red. A large officer stepped out from behind the desk. His name tag read, Officer Jackson. He was a veteran with 20 years of service and the patience of a saint, but even saints have their limits. He held up a hand, palm out, in the universal sign to stop. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice and put the phone away," he said, his tone firm but polite. "Recording is prohibited in the federal lobby. You also need to clear the area immediately. You do not have security clearance." Victoria laughed right in his face. It was a sharp, barking sound. "Clearance," she mocked. "Do you know who I am? I am Victoria Vance. My husband owns half of this city. I could buy this entire lobby and turn it into a shoe closet if I wanted to. I do not need clearance to visit my employee. Now move aside, rent-a-cop." She tried to step around him, but Jackson moved with surprising speed, blocking her path again. His hand rested hovering near his taser. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. Step back or you will be detained." Victoria's face turned a blotchy purple. The comments on her livestream were probably goading her on, fueling her delusion. She felt cornered, and when Victoria felt cornered, she attacked. She did not think about the consequences. She just saw an obstacle that needed to be removed. Detained, she shrieked, "You cannot detain me. I am a VIP. Do not touch me." She reared back her hand and swung. It was a sloppy, entitled slap fueled by rage and adrenaline. Her palm connected with the side of Officer Jackson's face, with a loud, wet crack. The sound echoed through the cavernous lobby, silencing her entourage instantly. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Officer Jackson did not flinch. He did not stumble. He slowly turned his head back to face her, his expression changing from annoyance to icy resolve. He touched his cheek where a red mark was already forming. "You just made a very big mistake," he said quietly. Victoria stood there, chest heaving, hands stinging, realizing too late that she had just slapped a federal officer in a federal building on a federal livestream. The reaction was instantaneous. Officer Jackson did not reach for his taser. He reached for the red button under the desk. A siren began to wail. It was not the high-pitched whine of a car alarm. It was a low, throbbing klaxon that vibrated in your teeth. It was the sound of a government facility going into total lockdown. Above the main entrance, heavy steel shutters slammed down over the glass, covering the revolving doors with a deafening clang. The sunlight was cut off, instantly replaced by the strobe of emergency red lights spinning from the ceiling. Victoria's friends started to scream, huddled together like terrified sheep. Victoria spun around looking for an exit, but there were no exits anymore. There was only the trap she had walked into. Then the elevators behind the security desk chimed. All 4 doors opened simultaneously. It was like a scene from a blockbuster movie, but with better budget and real guns. A dozen tactical officers poured out. They were not wearing standard police blues. They were wearing full tactical gear, heavy body armor, helmets with face shields, and assault rifles held at the ready. Across their chests in bold yellow letters were the words, "IRS Criminal Investigation." They fanned out with military precision, surrounding Victoria and her squad in seconds. Their boots thundered on the terrazzo floor, a drumbeat of doom. "Move, move, move," a squad leader shouted, his voice amplified by a speaker. "Hands in the air. Get down on the ground, now." Victoria stood frozen in the center of the chaos, her phone still held aloft, her mouth gaping open like a fish out of water. She looked at the heavy weaponry pointed at her chest. She looked at the steel shutters blocking her escape. For the first time, the delusion cracked. She realized she was not in a low-rent office park. She was not dealing with mall security. She had assaulted an officer in a building full of people who hunted cartels for a living. From my vantage point on the 7th floor, I watched the monitor with a cold satisfaction. She wanted attention. She wanted a spectacle. Well, she just got a front-row seat to the full power of the United States government, and she was the star of the show. The tactical team parted down the middle like the Red Sea, forming a corridor of black armor and heavy weaponry that led directly to the central elevator bank. These were the elevators that required a retinal scan to access, the ones Victoria had assumed led to the janitor's closet. The chime of the arrival bell cut through the tension like a knife. The silver doors slid open with a smooth hydraulic hiss, revealing the figure standing inside. It was me. But it was not the Simone that Victoria knew. The gray cardigan and the scuffed flats were gone. I was wearing a black tactical uniform tucked into combat boots. Over my chest was a heavy Kevlar vest emblazoned with bold yellow letters IRSCI. On my hip sat my service weapon, and on my belt was the gold badge that I had hidden in that wooden box she had so carelessly tossed aside. I stepped out of the elevator, my movements sharp and precise. I adjusted the earpiece in my ear and walked down the corridor of armed agents who snapped to attention as I passed. The silence in the lobby was absolute, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Victoria stared at me, her phone shaking in her hand. Her brain seemed to short-circuit. She looked at the guns, she looked at the federal agents, and then she looked at me. And then she started to laugh. It was a high-pitched, hysterical sound that bounced off the marble walls. She pointed her phone at me, zooming in on my vest. "Oh my God," she shrieked, her voice echoing with disbelief. "This is pathetic even for you, Simone. Is this what you do with your money? You buy costumes. Is it Halloween already? You are wearing cosplay to work. Do you think playing dress-up makes you important?" She turned to her followers, speaking into the camera with a manic grin. "Look at this, guys. She has completely lost it. She is wearing a fake police vest. She probably bought it at a party store. Simone, take that off before you hurt yourself. You look ridiculous." She honestly thought it was a game. She thought I was a sad, lonely woman playing pretend. She could not comprehend a reality where I was the hunter and she was the prey. I did not say a word. I just kept walking until I stood right in front of her, outside of striking distance, but close enough to see the fear hiding behind her eyes. I looked down at her red dress, now looking cheap and garish against the wall of tactical gear. "You should have read the plaque, Victoria," I said calmly. "Criminal investigation. We do not do cosplay. We do convictions." The heavy footsteps of a man approaching from the secure wing drew everyone's attention. It was Director Holloway, the head of the entire Southeast Field Office. He was a man who ate senators for breakfast and made cartel bosses weep. He walked with the authority of someone who had the entire United States Treasury behind him. He stopped next to me, and to the shock of Victoria and her entire entourage, he did not arrest me. He did not reprimand me for wearing the gear. He turned to me and gave a sharp, respectful nod. "Special Agent Vance," he said, his voice booming with authority. "The situation is under control. We have secured the perimeter." He handed me a thick file folder stamped with red ink. "The warrant has been signed by a federal judge. We have gathered enough evidence on the suspect's money laundering ring to proceed with immediate asset seizure. Your undercover work was exemplary. The team is ready for your command." Victoria dropped her phone. It hit the terrazzo floor with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. The livestream was still running, filming the ceiling, but the audio was capturing every humiliating second. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Agent," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Special Agent. But you drive a Honda. You live in a dump." "I drove a Honda because it is untraceable," I said, my voice cold and hard. "And I lived in that house to watch you, Victoria, to watch you steal, to watch you lie, to watch you forge documents. Every dinner, every insult, every time you called me a failure, I was building this file." Director Holloway stepped closer to her, looming over her shrinking figure. "You are under arrest, Mrs. Vance," he stated. "Not just for assaulting a federal officer, but for wire fraud, bank fraud, and operating a criminal enterprise. And you did it all on camera." He gestured to the tactical team. "Take her into custody." Victoria looked at me one last time. The arrogance was gone. The vanity was gone. There was only the terrifying realization that she had walked into the lion's den and poked the sleeping beast. And the beast was awake. Victoria stared at the gold badge clipped to my belt like it was a poisonous snake coiled ready to strike. Her brain was trying to process the impossible geometry of the situation, and it was failing. In her world, accountants wore beige cardigans and drove sedans. They did not wear Kevlar vests and led tactical teams. They certainly did not have the authority to shut down a federal building. "You are lying," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and stubborn denial. "This is a prank. You are a low-level tax preparer. I saw your apartment. I saw your car. You count beans, Simone. You do not chase criminals." She looked around at the armed agents, hoping one of them would break character and reveal the hidden camera crew for a reality TV show. But their faces were stone. Their fingers were near their triggers. This was not entertainment. This was federal law enforcement. Director Holloway stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing on the marble floor. He looked at Victoria with the kind of pity a lion might feel for a gazelle that walked into its den. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Special Agent Vance is not a tax preparer. She is the lead investigator for the Financial Crimes Division. She spent the last 3 years dismantling the Sinaloa cartel's money laundering operations in the Southeast. She put 3 mafia bosses in Supermax prison last year alone. She drives a Honda because driving a Porsche makes you a target for snipers. She lives modestly because she values her life more than her image." Victoria recoiled as if he had slapped her. "Mafia," she squeaked. "Cartels. But she is boring. She reads books. That is how she catches people like you," Holloway said. "Because criminals are arrogant. They think no one is watching the numbers. They think no one notices when they sell a $2 million painting for cash or forge a signature on a loan document. Agent Vance notices everything." One of the agents behind me chuckled. It was Agent Miller, the man who had played the role of the corrupt local cop who raided my room. He pulled off his sunglasses. "She is the best we have," Mrs. Vance Miller said. "You called her a failure at the funeral. But while you were buying shoes, she was seizing assets from drug lords. You should have treated her with more respect." The color drained from Victoria's face completely, leaving her looking like a wax doll left out in the sun. The reality was crashing down on her. The sister-in-law she had mocked, bullied and underestimated, was actually one of the most powerful women in the state. And Victoria had just hand-delivered herself to her doorstep on a silver platter. I stepped closer to her, my boots crunching on the broken glass of her phone screen. "I am the boring accountant Victoria," I said softly, "and I just audited your life, and guess what? You came up short." The tactical team leader barked a command, and 2 female agents moved in. They did not ask nicely. They grabbed Victoria's arms and spun her around. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and final. It was a mechanical click that signaled the end of her reign. "You cannot do this," Victoria shrieked, struggling against their grip. "I am pregnant. You are hurting the baby." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my vest pocket. I held it up so she could see it. "We executed a search warrant on Dr. Goldberg's clinic this morning, Victoria," I said. "We have your files. You had a tubal ligation 5 years ago. There is no baby." "There never was. That bump is silicone and lies." Victoria froze. Her last defense, her ultimate shield, had just been shattered. She looked down at her stomach, the fake bump looking suddenly ridiculous against the tactical gear surrounding her. The lie was exposed. The game was over. On the floor, her phone was still streaming. The screen was cracked, but the camera was still working. It was angled up, capturing everything from a low angle. The comments were flying by so fast, they were a blur. The tide had turned. Her fans were not cheering anymore. They were laughing. They were calling her a fraud. They were witnessing the fall of an influencer in real time. "Get that camera off me!" Victoria screamed, kicking at the phone. "Turn it off! Leave it!" Director Holloway ordered. "It is evidence. You wanted a show, Mrs. Vance. You wanted the world to see you take down Simone. Well, they are watching. Smile for your fans." The agents hauled her toward the exit. She did not walk with dignity. She dragged her feet, her heels scraping across the terrazzo. She screamed threats. She screamed for Kendrick. She screamed that she would sue the entire government. But no one was listening. I watched her go. I watched the red dress disappear into the back of a black federal SUV. I watched the heavy steel doors slam shut. I took a deep breath and felt the weight of the last 6 months lift off my shoulders. I looked down at the cracked phone on the floor. I bent down and picked it up. I looked into the camera lens. "Show is over," I said to the 50,000 people watching. Then I ended the stream. The sun was setting on the Atlanta skyline when Kendrick pulled his 1967 Shelby GT 500 into the lot of a luxury auto pawn shop. It was not just a car. It was a gift from our father when Kendrick got drafted into the NBA. It was pristine cherry red and worth more than my condo. But Kendrick did not look like a proud owner. He looked like a man selling his kidney to pay a ransom. I watched the security feed from the surveillance van parked across the street. Kendrick was shaking. He needed $200,000 cash for the bail bond. Victoria's arrest for assaulting a federal officer and wire fraud had come with a high price tag. The judge had considered her a flight risk, but Kendrick had pleaded through tears. The dealer, a man with a gold tooth and a shark-like smile, walked around the car kicking the tires disrespectfully. "I will give you $150," the dealer said, chewing on a toothpick. Kendrick pleaded. "It is appraised at $300,000. I need $200 today." The dealer shrugged. "Take it or leave it. I have to resell it, and who knows if it has engine trouble." Kendrick took it. He signed the title with a trembling hand, tears streaming down his face. He was selling his childhood memories to buy freedom for a woman who despised him. 2 hours later, I watched from my unmarked car parked outside the county jail. The heavy metal doors buzzed open with a harsh mechanical grind. Victoria stepped out. She did not look humbled. She did not look relieved. She looked furious. She was wearing a gray prison sweatsuit that clashed horribly with her spray tan, which was starting to streak from sweat. Kendrick ran to her, holding a jacket to cover her shoulders. "Vic, oh, thank God," he sobbed, reaching for her. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Victoria did not hug him back. She snatched the jacket and put it on, shivering in the night air. "Where is the Range Rover?" she demanded, looking around the empty parking lot. Kendrick hung his head. "It was impounded, Vic, since it was used in the commission of a crime during the fraud investigation. I had to take an Uber, and I sold the Shelby to get you out." Victoria stopped walking. She looked at him with cold, dead eyes. "You sold the Shelby? That car was an asset, Kendrick. It was going to appreciate in value." "You are such an idiot. Why didn't you just borrow money from your basketball friends?" "Oh wait, that is right, you don't have any because they all know you are a loser." She got into the waiting Uber without even saying thank you. Kendrick stood there for a moment in the drizzling rain, a broken man realizing that his sacrifice meant absolutely nothing to her. He wiped his face and climbed in after her, closing the door on his dignity. The ride back to the Buckhead estate was silent, but the moment the front door closed behind them, the explosion happened. I was monitoring the audio bugs in the foyer from my laptop at the safe house. Victoria tore off the cheap prison jacket and threw it at Kendrick. It hit him in the chest with a soft thud. "You let them take me!" she screamed, her voice raw from hours of yelling in a holding cell. "You stood there and watched while that little rat put me in handcuffs. Why did you not do something? Why are you so useless?" Kendrick stepped back, holding his hands up in surrender. "Vic, they were federal agents. They had guns. What was I supposed to do? Fight a SWAT team?" "You are my husband," Victoria shrieked. "You are supposed to protect me. Instead, you let Simone humiliate me in front of the entire world." "Do you know what they are saying on Twitter? They are making memes, Kendrick. They are laughing at me." She marched over to him, and for the second time that week she slapped him. It was hard and vicious. Kendrick touched his face, looking at her with a mixture of shock and exhaustion. "I sold my car for you," he whispered. "I depleted the last of the joint account. We have nothing left, Vic. We are broke." "Speak for yourself," Victoria spat. "I am not broke. I am temporarily illiquid, but not for long." She walked over to the antique desk where she had set up her command center. She pulled a burner phone from a hidden compartment in the floorboards. I watched on the camera feed as she dialed a number. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "It is me," she said into the phone. "The deal is on. I do not care about the probate court. I do not care about the freeze. I will sign the papers tonight. I am selling E-Corp." Kendrick gasped. "Vic, you cannot do that. The company belongs to the trust. You do not have the authority." Victoria covered the mouthpiece and glared at him. "I have your power of attorney, you idiot. I forged it last week, remember? I am selling the controlling interest to the Russian consortium. They are wiring 50 million to an offshore account in the Caymans tonight. We are leaving Kendrick. Pack a bag. We are taking the private jet to non-extradition territory before sunrise." She turned back to the phone. "Meet me at the warehouse in 1 hour. Bring the cash and the plane tickets." She hung up and smiled a terrifying rictus of desperation. Simone thinks she won. She thinks she trapped me. But she forgot one thing. I would rather burn this legacy to the ground than let her keep it. I watched her screen go dark. She thought she was escaping. She did not know she was heading to a meeting I had arranged. The Russians were not Russians. And the warehouse was not a safe haven. It was the final stage. The warehouse was a cavernous steel skeleton on the edge of the industrial district, the kind of place where bad decisions went to die. Victoria parked her Uber a block away and walked the rest of the distance, her heels clicking on the cracked pavement. She clutched a leather portfolio to her chest, containing the future of my father's legacy. Inside, a man named Dmitri waited. He was sitting at a folding table under a single flickering bulb, surrounded by 3 large men who looked like they bent steel girders for fun. Dmitri was actually Special Agent Kowalski from the Chicago field office, a legend in undercover work. But to Victoria, he was the answer to her prayers. She marched up to the table and slammed the portfolio down. "I want the wire transfer initiated before I sign," she demanded, trying to sound authoritative, despite the fact that she was standing in a puddle of hydraulic fluid. Dmitri laughed, a deep, booming sound that echoed off the metal walls. "You are in no position to make demands, Mrs. Vance. You are selling me $1 billion company for 50 million. That is a fire sale. That is desperation. I dictate the terms." Victoria flinched, but she did not back down. Her greed was a shield against her fear. "Fine," she snapped. "Just show me the proof of funds." Dmitri slid a tablet across the table showing an offshore account with a balance that made Victoria's eyes widen. $50 million. Enough to disappear. Enough to live like a queen in a country with no extradition treaty. She grabbed the pen. She did not hesitate. She did not think about the hundreds of employees who would lose their jobs. She did not think about the community programs E-Corp funded. She just thought about herself. "This place is a dump anyway," she muttered as she signed her name with a flourish. Elijah was a fool to hold on to it. He cared more about building community centers than building wealth. "I am doing the company a favor by selling it to someone who will actually strip it for parts." She signed the last page and pushed the documents back toward Dmitri. "Done. Now send the money. I have a plane to catch." 2 blocks away, inside the cramped interior of an unmarked surveillance van, the air was cold and smelled of stale coffee and high tension. I sat in front of a bank of monitors wearing a headset that fed every word of Victoria's betrayal directly into my ears. The video feed was crystal clear, captured by hidden cameras planted in the rafters and a button camera on Agent Kowalski's jacket. I watched her sign the papers. I watched the ink dry on the death warrant of my father's company. My hand hovered over the microphone button that connected to the tactical team waiting in the shadows. "Hold," I whispered to the team leader beside me. "Not yet. Let her take the confirmation. Let her believe she got away with it. I needed the transaction to be finalized. I needed the intent to be undeniable." On the screen, Dmitri tapped his tablet. "The transfer is initiated." He lied smoothly. "You should see the confirmation on your burner phone in 5 minutes." Victoria let out a sigh that sounded like a tire deflating. She slumped into the chair, a smile of pure relief spreading across her face. Finally, she breathed. "I am free. I am rich, and I am free of that pathetic family." I looked at the monitor, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. She called us pathetic. She called my father a fool. But she was the one sitting in a warehouse selling her soul for pennies on the dollar. She had just committed corporate espionage fraud and money laundering in a single stroke. I reached out and tapped the screen right over her smiling face. "We got her," I said, my voice devoid of any triumph, just a cold, hard certainty. "The trap is sprung. All units move in. But do not arrest her yet. Let her walk out. Let her think she is heading to the airport. I want to take her down when she feels safest. I want her to see the flashing lights just as she tastes the freedom. Capture the documents. Secure the evidence." Tonight, Victoria Vance finds out that the only thing she actually sold was her own future. The courtroom was a theater of cruelty, and Victoria was the lead actress. The Georgia Supreme Court was packed to the rafters with reporters, legal analysts, and curious onlookers who smelled blood in the water. The air conditioning struggled against the heat of 300 bodies, all leaning forward to witness the dismantling of the Vance empire. I sat at the defense table next to Mr. Sterling. Across the aisle, Victoria sat next to her new legal team, a phalanx of sharks in $3,000 suits. She had somehow managed to secure representation on contingency, promising them a massive cut of the $800 million she was trying to steal. She looked impeccable. She wore a modest navy suit that whispered old money and conservative values. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore no jewelry except for her wedding ring. She looked like a grieving widow fighting for survival. She did not look like a woman who had tried to sell a company to a Russian mobster in a warehouse 3 days ago. Her lead attorney, a man named Bradford, with teeth so white they looked radioactive, stood up to address the judge. "Your Honor," he boomed, his voice filling the cavernous room, "we are here today to correct a grave injustice. The document known as the Humble Trust is not the will of a sane man. It is the rambling of a mind ravaged by dementia. Elijah Vance was not competent when he signed those papers. He was paranoid. He was delusional. He was manipulated by those who sought to control his fortune for themselves." Bradford pointed a finger directly at me. I did not flinch. I kept my face stone cold. And as for Mr. Kendrick, Vance Bradford continued gesturing to my brother who sat behind me looking like a ghost. "We have medical records proving a history of depression and dependency. He is mentally unfit to manage a lemonade stand, let alone a billion-dollar conglomerate. He has been brainwashed by his sister into acting against his own interests and the interests of his wife. Victoria Vance is the only competent adult in this family. She is the only one trying to save E Corp from ruin. She is asking for emergency conservatorship over the estate and over her husband." The audacity was breathtaking. She was not just trying to steal the money. She was trying to legally enslave my brother. She wanted to declare him incompetent so she could sign his name on checks for the rest of his life. I looked at Kendrick. He was trembling. He believed it. He believed he was crazy because she had told him he was crazy every day for 3 years. Victoria took the stand. She walked slowly, one hand on the railing, the other cradling her stomach. She looked fragile. She looked brave. She looked like a lie wrapped in silk. She sat down and looked at the jury with big, watery eyes. "I did not want to do this," she whispered into the microphone. "I loved Elijah. But in the end, he did not know who I was. He thought I was a spy. He thought the toaster was listening to him. It broke my heart to see him like that. And Simone." She paused, wiping a tear. "She took advantage of him. She made him sign those papers when he was confused. She cut me off. She cut Kendrick off. We have no money for food. We have no money for doctors. I am terrified." The jury was eating it up. I saw a woman in the front row dab her eyes with a tissue. They saw a pregnant woman fighting a corrupt system. They did not see the silicone pad strapped to her waist. They did not know that the only thing growing inside her was her ego. Victoria shifted in the witness chair, wincing slightly as if the physical burden of her pregnancy was causing her pain. She adjusted her posture, leaning back to emphasize the swell of her stomach against the fabric of her navy blazer. It was a masterclass in nonverbal manipulation. Every movement was calculated to remind the courtroom that there were two victims here: the grieving widow and the innocent unborn heir. "Your Honor," Victoria said, her voice gaining a little strength, but still quivering with emotion, "this is not about me. I do not care about the yachts or the houses. I can live in a box if I have to. But I cannot let my son be born into poverty. I cannot let my husband be destroyed by his sister's vindictiveness." She placed both hands on the fake bump, rubbing it in slow, soothing circles. "This baby is the future of the Vance family." She continued, looking directly at the jury. "He is the only thing Elijah had left, and Simone wants to starve him before he even takes his first breath. She froze my accounts. She took my car. I had to walk here today, a pregnant woman walking in the heat, because my sister-in-law wants to punish me for being white, for being an outsider. The racial card." She finally played it. The gasp in the courtroom was audible. She was painting herself as the victim of reverse racism in a city where racial tension was always simmering just beneath the surface. It was a dangerous game, but Victoria did not care about collateral damage. She only cared about winning. I looked at Mr. Sterling. He was not writing notes anymore. He was watching her with the intensity of a hawk watching a field mouse. He knew what was coming. We had the medical records. We had the surveillance footage. But we needed her to commit fully to the lie under oath. We needed her to tie the noose so tight she could never slip out of it. "Is it true," Mrs. Vance Bradford asked gently, "that you have had complications with the pregnancy due to stress?" Victoria nodded, tears spilling over her lashes now. "Yes. My doctor said I am high risk. The stress of this trial, the stress of not knowing if we will have a roof over our heads. It is killing me. I feel him kicking right now. He knows his mother is scared." She looked down at her belly, whispering to it, "It is okay, baby. Mommy is fighting for you." It was repulsive. It was the most disgusting display I had ever witnessed. She was using a phantom child as a human shield. I thought about the tubal ligation records in my briefcase. I thought about the photos of her smoking outside the plastic surgery clinic. I thought about the fact that she was willing to perjure herself a dozen times over just to get her hands on a checkbook. I stood up. I did not wait for my turn. I did not wait for the judge to call on me. I just stood up. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting through her performance like a razor blade, "I would like to submit a motion to dismiss based on irrefutable evidence of perjury fraud and the fact that the plaintiff is currently wearing a prosthetic device in a court of law." The judge banged his gavel. "Order. Sit down, Agent Vance. You will have your turn." I did not sit down. I looked straight at Victoria. "Take it off, Victoria," I said. She froze, her hands clenched on her stomach. "Excuse me," she spat, dropping the act for a split second. "Take off the bump," I said louder. "Show the court the baby. Or should I show them the receipt from the Hollywood prop store where you bought it 3 months ago?" Victoria looked at the jury. Her eyes were wide with panic. She stood up, intending to storm out to play the victim one last time. But in her haste, she snagged the edge of her blazer on the armrest of the witness chair. The fabric pulled tight. There was a loud pop, and then silence as something shifted underneath her clothes. The perfectly round bump slid sideways. It migrated to her hip, giving her a grotesque, lopsided silhouette. The courtroom went dead silent. Victoria looked down. She tried to shove it back into place, but it was too late. The illusion was shattered. The lie was visible to everyone. And I was just getting started. Mr. Sterling stood up from the defense table, slowly buttoning his jacket with the deliberate movements of a man who knew he held the winning hand. He did not rush to the witness stand. He let the silence in the courtroom stretch until it was uncomfortable, until every cough and shifting chair sounded like a gunshot. He walked toward Victoria, who was dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, looking like the picture of a martyred saint. Mrs. Vance Sterling began, his voice soft, but carrying to the back of the room. You have testified that your desperate financial need is solely for the benefit of your unborn child. You stated that the stress of poverty is endangering the heir to the Vance fortune. Is that correct? Victoria sniffled and looked at the jury, her eyes wide and pleading. Yes, she whispered. I am fighting for my son. I am fighting for Kendrick's legacy. We have nothing. I cannot even afford prenatal vitamins. Sterling nodded sympathetically. And you are certain that this child belongs to Mr. Kendrick Vance? You are testifying under oath that there is no doubt regarding paternity. Victoria straightened her spine indignantly. How dare you? Of course it is Kendrick's. I am a faithful wife. I love my husband. This baby was conceived in love. I swear on my life and the life of my unborn son that he is a Vance. Sterling paused. He looked at the judge, then back at Victoria. You swear on the life of your unborn son. That is a heavy oath, Mrs. Vance. Are you aware of the penalties for perjury in a federal case involving estate fraud? Victoria scoffed. I do not need you to lecture me on the law. I am telling the truth. I need that money because I am bringing a life into this world. A life that Simone and her father are trying to starve before he is even born. Sterling smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who just watched the sheep lock the gate from the inside. Thank you, Mrs. Vance, he said. No further questions. But please remain on the stand. We have a rebuttal witness. Victoria looked confused, but she stayed put, adjusting her fake bump and glaring at me. She thought she had won. She thought her performance was Oscar-worthy. She did not see the projector screen descending from the ceiling behind the judge's bench. The bailiff announced the next witness, Special Agent Simone Vance. I stood up. I did not smooth my skirt. I did not check my hair. I walked to the stand with the measured stride of an executioner. I carried a single flash drive in my hand. I sat down and swore to tell the truth. I did not need to look at Victoria to feel her eyes boring into the side of my head. She was starting to sweat. She could feel the shift in the air. Agent Vance Sterling asked, in the course of your investigation into the financial irregularities of the Vance estate, did you uncover any evidence regarding the defendant's personal associations? I did. I replied, my voice clear and projecting to the back row. We obtained surveillance footage from a camera hidden inside the smoke detector of the master bedroom suite. This footage was recorded 3 weeks ago. Sterling nodded to the bailiff. Please play Exhibit G. The lights in the courtroom dimmed. The massive screen flickered to life. The video was high-definition, crystal-clear audio. It showed the master bedroom of the Buckhead mansion. It showed Victoria. She was not crying. She was not stressed. She was laughing. And she was not alone. Lying next to her in the bed that used to belong to my parents was a man. He was huge-muscled and definitely not my brother. It was Jax, the personal trainer she had used to steal the painting. They were sharing a bottle of champagne and counting stacks of cash on the duvet. The audio boomed through the courtroom. You are a genius, babe, Jax said on the screen, kissing her neck. Kendrick really believes he knocked you up. Victoria laughed, throwing a bundle of $100 bills into the air. He is such an idiot. I haven't let him touch me in 6 months. I told him it was immaculate conception or something. He was so happy he cried. But what happens when the baby comes? Jax asked. What if it looks like me? Or what if there is no baby? Victoria sat up and looked directly into the camera lens she didn't know was there. Her face was twisted in a sneer of pure malice. There is no baby, you moron, she said, patting her flat stomach. It is a pillow. I bought it on Amazon. By the time the due date comes, we will be in Brazil with the 800 million. I will stage a miscarriage. Kendrick will be so broken he won't even ask for an autopsy. We take the money and we run. The video froze on her smiling face. The courtroom erupted. It was chaos. The jury was gasping. The reporters were typing furiously. Kendrick let out a sound that was half sob, half scream, and buried his face in his hands. Victoria sat in the witness chair, paralyzed. She looked at the screen, then she looked at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The lie was not just exposed, it was obliterated. She had just admitted to adultery, conspiracy, fraud, and faking a pregnancy to steal a fortune, all while insulting the intelligence of the man she claimed to love. I leaned into the microphone. That was recorded 2 days before you filed for emergency conservatorship. I said, my voice cutting through the noise. You swore on the life of your son, Victoria. But the only thing you were pregnant with was greed. I stood there holding the medical file like a weapon. The video on the screen had faded to black, but the image of Victoria laughing about her fake pregnancy was burned into everyone's retinas. The silence in the courtroom was heavy. It was the kind of silence that usually happens before a sentencing. Victoria was shaking in the witness stand. Her face was pale. She looked like a trapped animal looking for an exit, but there were no exits. I took a step closer to the jury box. I wanted them to see this. I wanted them to understand the depth of her depravity. I held up the file in my hand. It was stamped with the seal of the Beverly Hills Surgical Center. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I said, my voice steady and cold. You have heard the defendant swear on the life of her unborn child. You have seen her weep for the future of the Vance dynasty. But I have here a certified medical record that proves that future was never going to happen. I opened the file. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a surgical consent form, signed by Victoria 5 years ago. I read it aloud. Patient elected for voluntary tubal ligation. Reasons stated: career maintenance and aesthetic preservation. Victoria Vance did not want children. She wanted to be a swimsuit model. She sterilized herself to keep her waistline. This pregnancy is biologically impossible. Victoria let out a sound that was not human. It was a primal shriek of rage and denial. She jumped up from the witness chair, knocking it backward. It clattered against the wood paneling with a deafening crash. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You are a liar!" she screamed, her voice shredding her throat. "That is a fake. You forged it just like you forged everything else. I am pregnant. Look at me. Look at my baby." She looked at Kendrick, who was staring at her with hollow, dead eyes. "Tell them, Kendrick. Tell them you felt him kick. Tell them about the nursery we painted." Kendrick did not move. He did not speak. He just looked at her stomach with a mixture of horror and realization. Victoria saw he was not coming to save her. She saw the judge reaching for his gavel. She saw the bailiff moving toward her. Panic took over. Reason fled. She grabbed the hem of her blouse. She clawed at the fabric, her nails tearing through the silk. "I will show you!" she shrieked. "I will show you all!" She yanked the shirt up. She wanted to show skin. She wanted to show a curve that would prove me wrong. But in her frenzy, she snagged the strap of the prosthetic. There was a loud snap of elastic. Gravity did the rest. The large pink silicone mound slid out from under her waistband. It did not look like a belly. It looked like a prop from a bad movie. It hit the floor with a wet, heavy thud that echoed through the silent courtroom. It bounced once and rolled to a stop at the feet of the court reporter. Victoria looked down. She looked at her flat stomach. She looked at the silicone ball on the floor. The entire room gasped in unison. It was over. The lie lay there on the carpet for everyone to see. The judge raised his gavel high in the air, ready to bring down the hammer of justice on the fraud standing before him. The silence in the room was so thick you could choke on it. Victoria stood shivering in the witness box, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped rat looking for a sewer drain. She had been stripped of her dignity, her lies, and her fake pregnancy, all in the span of 5 minutes. The bailiff took a step toward her, handcuffs ready at his belt. The jury members were leaning forward, their faces mixtures of disgust and fascination. This was the end. This was the moment the credits rolled on her twisted little reality show. But the universe had one more plot twist in store. one that would make the silicon belly on the floor look like a minor blooper. A low, rumbling sound vibrated through the floorboards. It sounded like heavy machinery moving, or the earth itself shifting on its axis. It came from the back of the courtroom. Every head turned in unison. The massive double doors at the main entrance, usually locked and guarded by bailiffs during session, began to shudder. They were 12 feet tall, made of solid oak and reinforced with steel. They did not open easily. But now they were swinging inward with a slow, majestic groan that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. A beam of pure white light from the hallway atrium flooded into the dim wood-paneled courtroom. It was blindingly bright, washing out the fluorescent lights overhead. It cut through the stale air like a laser beam, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the sudden draft. For a heartbeat, all we could see was the light. It was ethereal, almost supernatural. A collective gasp went through the gallery. The judge lowered his gavel, his hand frozen in midair. Victoria shielded her eyes, squinting into the glare, her breath hitching in her throat. Then a silhouette appeared in the center of the light. It was a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and stood with a posture that commanded instant respect. He was not alone. Flanking him on either side were 4 figures in dark suits. They were not lawyers. They moved with the disciplined precision of law enforcement. The light glinted off the silver badges clipped to their belts. United States Marshals. The silhouette took a step forward, emerging from the blinding halo and stepping into the courtroom. The sound of his dress shoes clicking on the parquet floor was rhythmic and deliberate. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a reckoning approaching. He stopped just inside the doors and adjusted his jacket. The light was still behind him, casting his face in shadow, but the crowd knew that walk. They knew that presence. It was the walk of a man who owned the city. The figure stepped fully into the room, and the light hit his face. The air left the room in a sudden rush. A woman in the back row screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear, it was a scream of recognition, a scream of impossibility. The man was wearing a suit of pristine white linen. It was a stark contrast to the somber gray and black of the courtroom. It was the color of resurrection. It was the color of a ghost who had come back to haunt the living. But this man was not a ghost. He was solid. He was vibrant. He was breathing. He took off his white fedora and held it over his heart, looking around the room with eyes that sparkled with intelligence and life. He looked healthier than he had in 10 years. His skin glowed. His back was straight. The frailty that had plagued him in his final months was gone, replaced by a vitality that seemed almost miraculous. It was Elijah Vance, my father, the man we had buried 6 months ago, the man Victoria had eulogized while planning to sell his legacy. He was standing there alive and well, looking at the woman who had tried to dance on his grave. Kendrick stood up so fast his chair tipped over and clattered to the floor. He made a sound that was half sob and half choke. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he was hallucinating from the stress. He looked at me, but I just smiled and nodded toward the door. This was the payoff. This was the moment we had worked for. Victoria was not looking at me. She was staring at the man in the white suit. Her face had gone from pale to a sickly shade of gray. Her knees gave out and she collapsed back into the witness chair, her hands gripping the armrest so hard her knuckles turned white. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out, just a high-pitched wheeze. "Hello, Victoria," my father said, his voice booming through the silent courtroom without the need for a microphone. "You look like you have seen a ghost." He walked down the center aisle, the marshals falling into step behind him. The crowd parted like the Red Sea people pressing themselves back against the benches to let him pass. Some reached out to touch his sleeve as if to verify he was real. He nodded to them, acknowledging old friends and business partners. He walked right up to the bar that separated the gallery from the court. He stopped and looked up at the judge. "Your Honor," my father said, his voice smooth and rich. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but as you can see, reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. In fact, They were entirely fabricated. The judge found his voice. Mr. Vance. But we have a death certificate. We have a coroner's report. We have a probate case. All part of a federal sting operation, Your Honor, my father explained calmly. I have been in protective custody for the last 6 months, working with the FBI and my daughter, Special Agent Vance. We needed to flush out a predator, and we needed her to think the sheep were unguarded. He turned his gaze slowly, deliberately toward the witness stand. He looked at Victoria with a mixture of pity and steel. I heard your eulogy, Victoria, he said. It was very moving, especially the part where you promised to honor my memory. I assume selling my company to a money launderer was your way of showing respect. Victoria finally found her voice. It was a shriek of pure madness. No, she screamed, clawing at her own face. No, this is a trick. It is a hologram. He is dead. I poisoned him. I put the powder in his coffee every morning. I watched him die. The courtroom erupted again. She had just confessed to attempted murder. My father smiled a cold, hard smile. You tried, Victoria. You certainly tried. But Simone switched my medication weeks before you started. You were poisoning a plant, and I was drinking decaf. Now I believe the marshals have a warrant for your arrest. And this time you won't be needing a bail bondsman. You will be needing a priest. My father stood before the witness stand looking like a Judgment Day prophet in his white linen suit. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The silence in the courtroom was so profound that the hum of the air conditioning sounded like a jet engine. Victoria was shaking so violently that her teeth were chattering. She looked at him as if he were a monster, but he was just a man, a father who had been pushed too far. You thought you were so clever, Victoria, my father said, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. Every morning for 6 months you brought me my coffee. You smiled. You asked me how I slept. And every morning you slipped a pinch of digitalis powder into the cup. You thought it would look like a natural heart decline. You thought an old man's heart just gives out. The jury gasped. Several jurors covered their mouths in horror. Kendrick stared at his wife as if seeing a stranger. I knew, Victoria. My father continued, stepping closer to the railing. I knew from the first week. I felt the palpitations. I saw the residue. But I did not call the police, not then. I needed to know how deep the rot went. I needed to know if my son was involved. So I called Simone. He gestured to me. My daughter took samples of the coffee. She ran the toxicology reports. We switched the medication. For 5 months, you were poisoning a houseplant in the study. That fern is dead, by the way. You owe me a new one. Victoria sobbed a wet, ragged sound. But the heart attack, she wailed. The ambulance. The coma. I saw the monitors. Staged, my father said simply. The paramedics were federal agents. The doctors were specialists in witness protection. The coma was a medically induced nap. I needed to be dead so you would feel safe. I needed to be in the ground so you would show your true colors. And you did not disappoint. You tried to sell my life's work before the dirt was even settled on my empty grave. Victoria looked around the room, searching for an escape, searching for a lawyer, searching for anyone who would believe her. But she was alone on an island of her own making. The silicone belly lay on the floor, a pink rubber testament to her lies. Her husband was looking at her with pure loathing. And the man she tried to kill was standing over her alive and victorious. You are a monster, she whispered. You tricked me. This is entrapment. No, Victoria. My father said, his voice cold as the grave she thought she put him in. This is consequences. I stepped forward then. The metal of the handcuffs felt heavy and cold in my hand. They were not the standard issue police cuffs. They were high-security restraints, the kind we used for high-value targets who had nothing left to lose. I walked up the steps to the witness stand. My boots clicked on the floor, a rhythmic countdown to the end of her freedom. Victoria looked at the cuffs, then at me. Her eyes were wild. You cannot arrest me, she hissed. I am a Vance. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. But I suggest you start talking because your list of crimes is longer than your credit card statement. I snapped the first cuff onto her wrist. The sound was a sharp metallic click that signaled the end of the road. You are not just a greedy social climber, Victoria, I said, pulling her arm behind her back. You are a suspect in a federal investigation for attempted murder. You are looking at charges for wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. But that is just the appetizer. I snapped the second cuff on tight. Yesterday you walked into a warehouse and signed a contract to sell E-Corp for $50 million cash. You thought you were selling to a Russian syndicate. You thought you were being smart, laundering the money through the Cayman Islands. I leaned in close so only she could hear the next part, but the microphone picked it up anyway. The buyer was an undercover agent, Victoria. The contract you signed was not a bill of sale. It was a full confession. You admitted to owning the assets illegally. You admitted to the intent to defraud the estate. You admitted to the fake pregnancy to bypass the trust restrictions. You signed your name on a federal indictment. Victoria slumped against the witness stand, the fight draining out of her like water from a cracked vase. She looked at Kendrick one last time. Kendrick, baby, please, she begged. Tell them I did it for us. Kendrick stood up slowly. He looked at the father he thought he had lost. He looked at the sister he had betrayed. And then he looked at the woman who had turned him into a pawn. There is no us. Kendrick said, his voice hollow. There never was. He turned his back on her. The marshals moved in then, flanking Victoria and lifting her to her feet. She did not scream this time. She did not fight. She just sagged a broken doll in a designer suit that no longer fit. Take her away, Director Holloway ordered from the back of the room. As they led her out past the stunned jury, past the reporters scrambling to type the headline of the century past, the father she tried to kill, Victoria Vance, looked back one last time. She looked at the empty spot on the floor where her fake belly had fallen. It was the only legacy she was leaving behind. A piece of plastic and a lifetime of regret. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom slammed shut, but they could not silence the screams echoing from the hallway. Victoria Vance did not go quietly. She fought the marshals with the desperation of a woman who had never been told no in her entire life. She kicked and scratched her nails, digging into the tactical vests of the agents who held her. She screamed that she was a victim. She screamed that her husband would fire them all. She screamed my name with a hatred so pure it felt like a physical blow. But as the elevator doors closed on her red face, the silence that followed was deafening. 3 months later, I sat in the front row of the federal sentencing hearing. Victoria looked different. The designer suit was gone, replaced by a bright orange jumpsuit that washed out her pale complexion. Her hair, once perfectly highlighted, was dull and pulled back in a messy knot. She had lost weight, but not in the way she wanted. She looked gaunt and hollow. The arrogance that had fueled her for years had been burned away, leaving only a bitter husk. The judge adjusted his spectacles and looked down at her with zero sympathy. Victoria Vance, you have been found guilty of attempted murder, wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. You preyed on the elderly. You manipulated your husband. You wasted the court's time with perjury and theatrical displays of deception. Your lack of remorse is frankly chilling. Victoria stood up, her hands shackled to her waist. But, Your Honor, she pleaded, her voice cracking. I was just trying to survive. I made mistakes, but I am not a criminal. I am a businesswoman. The judge shook his head. No, Mrs. Vance. You are a predator, and society needs protection from predators. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal custody. There will be no possibility of parole. 25 years. Victoria's knees buckled. She collapsed into the chair beside her public defender, letting out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. 25 years meant she would be an old woman when she saw the sky without bars. Her youth, her beauty, her schemes, they all ended here. As the bailiffs hauled her up to take her away, she turned to look at the gallery. She looked for Kendrick, she looked for a savior. But Kendrick was not there. The only face she saw was mine. I adjusted my glasses and looked her dead in the eye. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just watched. "Enjoy the view, Victoria," I whispered, knowing she could read my lips. She lunged toward me, straining against the chains, but the guards held her fast. They dragged her through the side door, her orange jumpsuit disappearing into the shadows of the correctional system. The heavy metal door clanged shut with a finality that vibrated in my bones. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of the end. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright Atlanta sunshine. The air tasted cleaner. The city looked brighter. The cancer that had been eating away at my family had finally been cut out. Now the healing could begin. The warehouse district was humid and smelled of diesel fumes and hard work. It was a far cry from the air-conditioned luxury of the Buckhead estate. I parked my car next to the loading dock where the E-Corp trucks were lining up for the morning delivery. My father was already there, standing by a stack of shipping pallets. He looked strong in his work boots and button-down shirt, overseeing the operations of the company he had built with his bare hands. We were not alone. Kendrick was there too. But he was not wearing an Armani suit. He was wearing a gray uniform with a name tag that read trainee. He looked thinner. The softness of his luxury lifestyle had melted away, leaving behind a man who looked tired but awake. He was sweeping the loading dock floor, pushing a heavy industrial broom with a rhythmic determination. When he saw me approach, he stopped. He leaned the broom against the wall and walked over to us. He did not swagger. He did not look for a camera. He looked at his boots, then he looked at me. Then he did something I never thought I would see Kendrick Vance do. He dropped to his knees. Right there on the concrete in front of the truck drivers and the warehouse staff, my big brother knelt down. He did not care about the dirt on his pants. He did not care about his image. He bowed his head. "Dad Simone," he said, his voice shaking. "I am so sorry. I was blind. I was weak. I let her turn me into something I hate. I sold you out for a woman who wanted to kill you. I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not deserve it." My father looked down at his son. His face was stern, but his eyes were soft. "Get up, Kendrick," my father said. "A Vance does not kneel. A Vance stands up and fixes his mistakes." Kendrick stood up, wiping his eyes with the back of his dirty hand. "I want to fix it, Dad. I want to earn my name back. I do not want the money. I do not want the title. I just want a chance to be your son again." My father nodded slowly. "You have a long road ahead of you, son. You have a lot of debt to pay off. You have a lot of trust to rebuild. Victoria left you with nothing but a bad reputation." "I know," Kendrick said. "I am ready. I checked myself into the addiction program you suggested. For the spending. For the need to be seen. I am done with the flash. I just want to work." My father pointed to the warehouse floor. "Then get back to work. You start at the bottom, Kendrick. Minimum wage. No special treatment. You load the trucks. You sweep the floors. You learn this business from the ground up the way I did. If you stick with it for a year without complaining, then we will talk about the future." "Thank you, Dad," Kendrick breathed. "Thank you." He turned to me. "Simone, I know I was a terrible brother. I let her treat you like garbage. I am going to spend the rest of my life making it up to you." I looked at him. I saw the remorse in his eyes. I saw the little boy who used to share his candy with me. "Just sweep the floor, Kendrick," I said, giving him a small smile. "And maybe next time do not marry a woman who thinks manual labor is a crime." He laughed, a dry, rusty sound. "Deal." He picked up the broom and went back to work. I watched him for a moment, the dust swirling around him in the afternoon light. He had lost everything. His wife, his car, his fortune. But as he pushed that broom, sweating and dirty, he looked more like a man than he ever had in a three-piece suit. He was starting over. And this time he was building on solid ground. The heavy oak doors of the J. Edgar Hoover building usually inspired fear in the people who walked through them, but today they opened for a celebration. The auditorium was packed, not with social climbers or fake friends, but with the finest agents in the bureau. I stood backstage adjusting the collar of my dress uniform. It was the first time in 6 months I had worn it. For half a year I had worn the disguise of a downtrodden accountant, wearing cardigans that itched and shoes that pinched. Today, I was Special Agent Simone Vance, and I was finally in my own skin. Director Holloway stepped up to the podium. The room went silent. He spoke about the operation. He talked about the patience it took to dismantle a massive money laundering ring from the inside. He talked about the sacrifice of living a double life, of letting your own family believe you were a failure just so you could save them from a predator. He did not use Victoria's name. She was just a case number now, a solved file in the archives. When he called my name, the applause was thunderous. It was a wave of sound that washed away the memory of every insult and every moment of humiliation. I walked onto the stage, and the director handed me a new badge. It was not just a replacement. It was a promotion. Effective immediately, I was the new head of the Financial Crimes Division for the Southeast region. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the agents who had watched my back when I was undercover, at the team that had stormed the lobby when I gave the signal. They were my other family, the ones who knew that justice was not about being loud. It was about being right. I took the microphone. I did not make a long speech. I just looked at my father, who was sitting in the front row wiping a tear from his eye. I thanked him for trusting me. I thanked him for playing dead so we could catch a killer. And then I made a promise to the department. I promised that as long as I was in charge, no one would steal the American dream on my watch. Not with a gun, and certainly not with a fountain pen. 2 weeks later, the backyard of the Buckhead estate smelled like heaven. It was a mix of hickory smoke, slow-cooked ribs, and my grandmother's secret recipe, mac and cheese. The silence that had plagued this house for years was gone, replaced by the smooth sounds of Frankie Beverly and Maze playing over the speakers. It was a real barbecue, not a networking event, not a photo opportunity, a family reunion. The Italian cypresses were gone, dug up and replaced with native Georgia oaks that provided real shade. My father stood by the massive grill wearing an apron that said Grill Master. He was laughing, flipping ribs, and joking with Mr. Sterling, who had traded his three-piece suit for a polo shirt and a beer. They looked like two old friends enjoying the sunset, not survivors of a corporate war. I sat on the patio sipping a glass of iced tea, watching the scene. Kendrick was there too. He was moving through the crowd of cousins and neighbors carrying a huge tray of cornbread. He wasn't the center of attention. He wasn't trying to be a star. He was serving. He stopped by my chair and offered me a piece. "It is still warm," he said, his smile genuine for the first time in years. Dad let me make the glaze. I took a piece. It was perfect. Kendrick looked over at the empty spot where Victoria used to hold court. "I don't miss it," he said quietly. "The noise, the pressure. I like the quiet, Simone. I like the work." I patted his arm. "You are doing good, Kendrick. Keep sweeping." He nodded and went back to the grill. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me. The nightmare was over. The house was safe. The company was safe. And my family was whole again. I thought about Victoria sitting in her cell, thinking about the mistake she made. She thought she was fighting a weak sister-in-law. She thought she was fighting a woman who could be bullied. She did not know she was fighting the entire United States Treasury. I took a sip of my tea and smiled. The lesson was simple, really. Never judge a book by its cover. Never assume kindness is weakness. And above all else, never ever make an enemy of a forensic accountant. We always find the receipts. The most profound lesson here is that silence should never be mistaken for weakness. Victoria's downfall stemmed entirely from her arrogance. She judged Simone based on superficial appearances, her old car and modest clothes, completely failing to see the competence and authority hidden underneath. This story illustrates that while greed screams for attention, integrity quietly gathers evidence. True power does not need to show off, it waits. Ultimately, a life built on lies and manipulation is fragile. No matter how high a narcissist climbs, the truth is a patient hunter, and when it finally strikes, it destroys everything. If you have ever had to sit back and stay silent while someone underestimated you, knowing your moment of victory was coming, hit that subscribe button. Share your story in the comments below, because sometimes the best revenge isn't making a scene, it's making a success.